There is something about love, friends, something about the way it arrives in our lives, that feels like it was always meant to happen, like the person who walks into your world on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon was somehow written into the story of your life long before you were born, long before you took your first breath, long before you even knew what it meant to feel your heart tremble at the sound of someone's voice. And there is something equally mysterious, equally haunting, about the way love sometimes leaves, the way a person who once felt like home, who once felt like the answer to every question you had ever asked, can slowly, or sometimes suddenly, become a stranger, someone whose face you recognize but whose heart you can no longer reach, someone who sits across from you at the table but might as well be sitting on the other side of the ocean. This is one of the deepest puzzles of human existence, is it not? Why do we meet certain people? Why do we fall in love with them, specifically them, out of all the billions of souls walking this earth? And why, after all the promises, after all the tenderness, after all the nights spent talking until dawn, does the connection sometimes dissolve, like mist in the morning sun, leaving us standing alone in a field of questions with no answers in sight? The Buddha, who understood the workings of the human heart with a precision and compassion that still astounds us after more than 2,500 years, had a great deal to say about this. He did not speak about love the way poets speak about it, with roses and moonlight and declarations of forever. He spoke about it the way a doctor speaks about the body, with clarity, with honesty, with the kind of unflinching directness that can sting at first but ultimately heals. He spoke about the forces that bring people together and pull them apart, the invisible currents of cause and effect that flow beneath the surface of every relationship, shaping it, directing it, giving it its particular flavor of sweetness or bitterness, and he called these forces by names that have echoed through the centuries, fate and karma, or in the Pali language that he spoke, Pakaya and Kama, the conditions that bring things into being, and the actions, the choices, the intentions that create the fabric of our experience. Tonight, friends, we are going to sit with this. We are going to look at love through the lens of these teachings, not to strip love of its magic, not to reduce it to a cold, clinical formula, but to understand it more deeply, more honestly, more compassionately, so that when love comes, we can receive it with open hands, and when love goes, we can let it go with open hearts, without the bitterness that poisons so many lives, without the confusion that keeps us awake at 3 in the morning, replaying conversations, wondering what went wrong, wondering if we were not enough, wondering if we will ever feel that way again. Let us begin with a story from the time of the Buddha, one that is not told as often as it should be, but one that carries within it a truth so tender and so sharp that it cuts right to the heart of what we are talking about. In the city of Savatthi, there lived a young woman named Isidasi, whose story is preserved in the Therigatha, that extraordinary collection of poems written by the earliest Buddhist nuns, women who found liberation through practice and left behind verses of astonishing beauty and insight. Isidasi was, by all accounts, a woman of exceptional grace, beauty, and virtue. She was well educated, skilled in the domestic arts, gentle in speech, and devoted to her husband in every way that the culture of her time demanded and more. She was, in the language of her era, the perfect wife. And yet, her husband left her. Not once, but 3 times, because Isidasi was married 3 times, and each time, her husband abandoned her, not because she had done anything wrong, not because she was unkind or unfaithful, but because, as each husband explained in his own way, he simply could not bear to be with her. He could not explain why. There was no dramatic argument, no betrayal, no clear reason that anyone could point to and say, "Ah, that is why it failed." There was only a vague, persistent discomfort, an inability to connect, a feeling that something was fundamentally misaligned between them, like two instruments tuned to different keys, each beautiful on its own but producing discord when played together. Isidasi was devastated. She examined herself with ruthless honesty, wondering what was wrong with her, what hidden flaws she possessed that drove men away despite her best efforts. She did everything right, everything that a loving partner should do, and still, the result was the same. Abandonment. Rejection. The door closing, the footsteps fading, the silence settling in like dust in an empty room. When Isidasi finally came to the Buddhist teaching, when she heard the Dharma and understood the nature of karma, she had a revelation that changed her life. She realized, through deep reflection and through the guidance of the elder nuns, that her pattern of abandonment was not random, was not a punishment from an unkind universe, but was the ripening of seeds planted long ago, in lives she could not remember, in choices she had made before this body, this name, this particular story. She saw that in a past life, she herself had been the one who abandoned, the one who turned away from a loving partner without reason, the one who caused the very pain she was now experiencing. The karma had come full circle, not as revenge, but as a natural consequence, as inevitable and impersonal as a ball thrown into the air returning to the ground. This understanding did not make the pain disappear, friends. Let us be very clear about that. The Buddha never promised that understanding would eliminate pain. What he promised was that understanding would eliminate the confusion that makes pain unbearable. There is a difference between suffering and suffering about suffering, between the natural ache of loss and the added torment of, "Why me? What did I do wrong? Am I not worthy of love?" Isidasi still felt the ache. She was still human. But the "why me" dissolved, replaced by a clarity that allowed her to breathe, to accept, to move forward, and eventually, to find a peace that none of her marriages had ever given her. This story, friends, is not told to suggest that every time someone leaves you, it is because of something you did in a past life. The Buddha's teaching on karma is far more nuanced and subtle than that kind of simplistic, blame-oriented thinking. It is told to illustrate a principle that is at the heart of everything we will explore tonight, the principle that the relationships we enter into are not accidents, that the people we love are not random selections from a cosmic lottery, but are connected to us through a web of causes and conditions so vast and so intricate that even the most powerful mind can barely grasp its edges. The Pali word pakaya, which we can translate loosely as condition or contributing factor, points to this web. It tells us that nothing in this universe arises on its own, in isolation, without causes. Every event, every meeting, every glance exchanged across a crowded room, is the result of countless factors coming together at precisely the right moment. The Buddha described this in the teaching on dependent origination, Paticca Samuppada, which is not just a philosophical framework but a description of how reality actually works, how things come into being, persist for a time, and then pass away, all in dependence on conditions. When you meet someone and feel that electric, inexplicable pull, that sense of recognition, that feeling of, "I know you, I have always known you," what you are feeling is the resonance of shared conditions. Your paths have converged because the conditions for convergence were met. Perhaps it is shared karma from a previous life. Perhaps it is the ripening of intentions you both set in motion long ago. Perhaps it is simply the alignment of circumstances in this present life, the right place, the right time, the right combination of loneliness and longing and readiness that creates the space for love to walk in. Whatever the specific causes, the principle is the same. Nothing happens without conditions. And that includes love. But here is where the teaching becomes really interesting, really nuanced, and, if we are honest, really challenging. Because the same principle that explains why love arises also explains why love fades. If love arises because conditions are met, then love changes when conditions change, and love ends when conditions are no longer sufficient to sustain it. This is not a romantic idea. It will not sell greeting cards or inspire love songs. But it is true, and there is a deep, quiet comfort in its truth, a comfort that only becomes visible when we stop demanding that love be something it was never designed to be, which is permanent. The Buddha was once asked by a householder named Nakulapita, who was deeply in love with his wife Nakulamita, how to ensure that they would be together not just in this life but in the next. The Buddha's response was characteristically gentle and wise. He did not dismiss the question or mock the desire. He said that if two people wish to be together in the next life, they should cultivate the same level of faith, the same level of virtue, the same level of generosity, and the same level of wisdom. In other words, the conditions for being together must be continuously created and maintained. Love is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing practice, an ongoing alignment, an ongoing choice to cultivate the conditions that keep the connection alive. This teaching is profound, friends, because it shifts our understanding of love from something that happens to us to something that we actively participate in creating. It is not fate that keeps two people together. It is not destiny or luck or the alignment of stars. It is the daily, moment-by-moment cultivation of shared values, shared intentions, shared growth. And when that cultivation stops, when one person grows in one direction and the other in a different direction, when the conditions that once aligned begin to diverge, the relationship changes. It has to. Because it is a conditioned phenomenon, and conditioned phenomena are, by their very nature, impermanent. Now, I know that this can sound harsh, friends. It can sound like the Buddha was saying that love does not matter, that it is just another illusion, another temporary phenomenon to be observed and let go of. But that is not what he was saying at all. He was saying that love matters enormously, precisely because it is impermanent. He was saying that love is precious, precisely because it does not last forever in its current form. He was saying that the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the person you love, is to understand the nature of the connection between you, to cherish it while it is here, to nurture it with wisdom and kindness, and to release it with grace when the time comes for it to change. There is another story, one that comes from the Jataka Tales, the collection of stories about the Buddha's previous lives, that illustrates this beautifully. In one past life, the Bodhisattva was born as a golden swan, a magnificent bird with feathers that gleamed like polished gold in the sunlight. This swan lived beside a great lake in the foothills of the Himalayas, and every season, he would fly south to a warmer region, where he would spend the winter months on a smaller, quieter lake surrounded by reeds and lotus flowers. On this smaller lake lived a female swan, a bird of ordinary plumage but extraordinary character, kind, intelligent, graceful in her movements, gentle with every creature she encountered. The golden swan fell deeply in love with her. Every year, he would return to the lake, and every year, their reunion was a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. They would swim together, feed together, fly together in great, sweeping circles across the sky, their wings almost touching, their movements perfectly synchronized, as if they were two parts of a single being. But every year, when the seasons changed, the golden swan had to leave. His nature required him to return to the Himalayan lake, to the cold, clear waters where he was born. And every year, the parting was painful. The female swan would watch him fly north, growing smaller and smaller against the sky, until he was just a speck, and then nothing, and she would be alone again on the quiet lake, waiting, hoping, trusting that the seasons would bring him back. One year, the golden swan did not return. The female swan waited through the entire season, watching the sky every morning, listening for the sound of his wings every evening, but he did not come. She did not know that he had been captured by a hunter, that his golden feathers had attracted the attention of a king who wanted to possess such a rare and beautiful creature, that he was being held in a gilded cage in a palace far away. She only knew that he was gone, and the not knowing was worse than any definite loss, because it left the door of hope open just a crack, just enough to keep the pain alive. The Buddha, telling this story, did not focus on the drama of the capture or the tragedy of the separation. He focused on the female swan's response. He said that she grieved, yes, deeply and honestly, but she did not stop living. She did not refuse to eat or fly or be part of the world. She held her love for the golden swan in her heart, like a flame that she kept burning, and she continued to live her life with the same grace and kindness that had made him love her in the first place. She understood, in the intuitive way that beings sometimes understand without being taught, that love does not require the physical presence of the beloved. Love is a state of heart, not a state of geography. It can exist across any distance, survive any absence, endure any change, as long as the heart that holds it remains open. This, friends, is one of the most difficult lessons that love teaches us, and it is deeply connected to the Buddhist understanding of fate and karma. The conditions that bring two people together are real, powerful, and often deeply karmic. But the conditions that keep them together are different from the conditions that brought them together, and sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite our deepest love, the conditions for staying together are simply not present. Not because anyone is at fault. Not because the love was not real. But because conditions have changed, as conditions always do, in the endless, flowing, never static river of existence. The Buddha described this with a metaphor that is deceptively simple but endlessly deep. He said that when two sticks are rubbed together, they produce fire. But the fire does not belong to either stick. It arises because of the contact between them, and when the contact ceases, the fire ceases. This does not mean the fire was not real. It was real. It gave warmth. It gave light. It served its purpose. But it was a conditioned phenomenon, dependent on the contact, and when the contact ended, the fire ended with it. Love between two people is like this fire, friends. It arises in the contact, in the meeting of two hearts, two minds, two histories, two sets of karma. It is real while it lasts. It gives warmth, it gives light, it illuminates the dark corners of our lives and makes us feel, for a time, that we are not alone in this vast, sometimes bewildering universe. But it is conditioned. It depends on the ongoing presence of the conditions that created it. And when those conditions shift, when they are no longer sufficient to sustain the flame, the fire changes, dims, or goes out entirely, not because it was an illusion, but because that is the nature of all conditioned things. And here, right here, is where the teaching becomes not just philosophy but medicine, not just wisdom but comfort. Because if you are sitting with the ache of a love that has ended, if you are carrying the weight of a relationship that did not survive, if you are replaying the memories and wondering where it all went wrong, the Buddha would sit beside you, not above you, not in front of you lecturing, but right beside you, and he would say, very gently, it was real. What you felt was real. The love was real. The connection was real. And it ended, not because you failed, not because you were unworthy, but because the conditions that sustained it completed their course. The karma between you and that person has expressed itself, has done what it needed to do, has taught what it needed to teach, and now, like a river reaching the sea, it has arrived at its natural destination. This is what it means to understand love through the lens of fate and karma, friends. It means seeing that every relationship is a meeting of karmic streams, a convergence of causes and effects that have been flowing since beginningless time. It means understanding that the person you love is not yours to keep, not because the universe is cruel, but because nothing in the universe belongs to anyone. We are all borrowing each other, for a season, for a lifetime, for a moment, and the beauty of the borrowing is not diminished by its temporariness. If anything, it is enhanced by it, made more vivid, more precious, more worthy of our full attention and care. There was a monk in the Buddhist time, a man named Vangisa, who before his ordination had been a poet, a man of deep feeling and passionate expression. Vangisa struggled mightily with attachment, not just to romantic love, but to beauty in all its forms, the beauty of words, of nature, of the human face. He once confessed to the Buddha that even after ordination, he was tormented by memories of a woman he had loved, a woman whose smile he could not forget, whose voice still echoed in his mind during meditation. He felt ashamed of this, felt that he was failing as a monk, that his attachment proved he was not worthy of the robe. The Buddha's response was remarkable in its tenderness. He did not scold Vangisa. He did not tell him to suppress his feelings or to be ashamed of his humanity. He said, Vangisa, the memory of beauty is not the enemy. The clinging to that memory is. You can appreciate what was beautiful without grasping after it. You can honor the love that was without demanding that it return. The flower that bloomed yesterday does not diminish the flower that will bloom tomorrow. Let the past be the past, and let your heart be free to bloom again, in whatever way life offers. This teaching, friends, is a balm for every broken heart. It says that it is okay to remember. It is okay to feel. It is okay to carry the sweetness of a past love in your heart like a pressed flower between the pages of a book. What is not okay, what causes suffering, is the grasping, the clinging, the desperate attempt to hold on to what has already moved on, the refusal to accept that the conditions have changed and the relationship has completed its natural arc. And this brings us to a question that many people ask, a question that sits at the intersection of love and spirituality, of the human heart and the Buddhist path. The question is this: if love is conditioned, if relationships are impermanent, if even the deepest connection can end, then what is the point? Why love at all? Why open yourself to the possibility of loss? Why not simply protect your heart behind a wall of detachment and avoid the whole messy, painful business altogether? The Buddha addressed this question, not directly in these words, but through the whole arc of his teaching, and his answer, if we listen carefully, is this: the point of love is not permanence. The point of love is transformation. Every person who enters your life, every heart that touches yours, changes you. They sand down your rough edges. They reveal your blind spots. They show you parts of yourself that you could never see alone, the beautiful parts and the ugly parts, the generous parts and the selfish parts, the courageous parts and the terrified parts. Love is a mirror, friends, and sometimes what we see in that mirror makes us weep with joy, and sometimes it makes us weep with shame, but either way, we are seeing more clearly, and that clarity is the beginning of wisdom. The people who come into our lives and then leave are not failures. They are teachers. The relationship that ends is not a waste. It is a lesson completed. The love that fades is not a lie. It is a truth that has finished speaking. And if we can hold this understanding in our hearts, if we can see our past loves not as enemies who hurt us or prizes that we lost, but as fellow travelers who walked with us for a stretch of the road before their path diverged from ours, then the bitterness begins to dissolve, the resentment begins to soften, and what remains is something clean and light and surprisingly peaceful, a gratitude for what was, without the desperate need for it to be what it is not. And that gratitude, friends, that quiet, settled sense of thankfulness for what was given rather than bitterness for what was taken away, is one of the most healing forces available to the human heart. It does not come easily. It does not arrive overnight. It requires a willingness to sit with pain, to breathe through the waves of longing and regret, to resist the temptation to build a story in which you are the victim and the other person is the villain, because as long as you are trapped inside that story, you cannot see the larger truth, the truth that both of you were simply doing your best with the conditions you had, the karma you carried, the understanding you possessed at the time. The Buddha once encountered a woman named Patakara, whose story is one of the most harrowing in all of Buddhist literature, not because of romantic love specifically, but because of the way loss can accumulate until it feels like the ground itself has been pulled out from under your feet. Patakara had lost her husband, her 2 children, her parents, and her brother, all in a devastating sequence of events that left her wandering the streets of Savatthi, half mad with grief, her clothes torn, her hair wild, her eyes empty of everything except pain. People avoided her. They called her crazy. They crossed the street when they saw her coming. But the Buddha did not cross the street. He stood still and spoke to her with a voice so calm, so steady, so full of quiet authority, that it cut through the fog of her madness like a beam of light through darkness. He said, simply, "Sister, recover your presence of mind." And something in those words, something in the tone, something in the unwavering compassion of his gaze, reached the part of her that was still whole, still sane, still capable of hearing truth. She stopped. She looked at him. And she listened. The Buddha did not minimize her loss. He did not tell her that everything happens for a reason, or that she should look on the bright side, or that time heals all wounds. He told her the truth, which is that loss is the nature of conditioned existence, that everything we love is subject to change and separation, that no amount of clinging can prevent the impermanent from being impermanent. And then he did something extraordinary. He told her that this very understanding, this very truth that seemed so cruel, was actually the doorway to freedom, that by seeing clearly the nature of what had happened, by accepting it fully without turning away, she could find a peace that was not dependent on any external condition, a peace that could not be taken from her because it was not based on anything that could be lost. Patakara went on to become one of the foremost nuns in the Buddhist community, renowned for her wisdom and her ability to counsel others who were drowning in grief. She became a teacher of the very truth that had nearly destroyed her, and her teaching was so powerful precisely because she had lived it, not as an abstract philosophy, but as the raw, bleeding reality of a woman who had lost everything and found, in the depths of that loss, something that could never be lost. Now, friends, you might be thinking, that is a beautiful story, but my situation is different. My loss is not as dramatic as Patakara's. My heartbreak is just ordinary heartbreak, the kind that millions of people go through every day, the kind that does not make it into scriptures or poetry collections. My boyfriend left me. My girlfriend chose someone else. My marriage slowly disintegrated over years of silence and misunderstanding until one morning we looked at each other across the breakfast table and realized that we had become two strangers sharing a house. Is the Buddha's teaching really relevant to my ordinary, unremarkable, garden-variety broken heart? And the answer, friends, is yes. Absolutely, completely, unequivocally yes. Because the Buddha's teaching is not about the scale of the loss. It is about the nature of loss itself. Whether you have lost a child or lost a lover, whether the parting was dramatic or quiet, whether it happened suddenly or eroded slowly over years, the underlying truth is the same. You are experiencing the impermanence of a conditioned phenomenon. You are encountering, firsthand, the reality that the Buddha described so clearly, that all things that arise through conditions will, when those conditions change, also change or cease. And this is where the concept of angip, of karma, becomes really important for understanding love. Because karma is not just about what you did in a past life. It is about what you are doing right now, in this life, in this moment, with your thoughts, your words, your actions. The Buddha defined karma as intention, satana in Pali. He said, "It is intention that I call karma, for having intended, one acts through body, speech, and mind." This means that the quality of your relationship is shaped not by fate, not by some cosmic script written before you were born, but by the quality of the intentions you bring to it, moment by moment, day by day. When you enter a relationship with the intention to possess, to control, to make the other person the source of your happiness, you are planting seeds of suffering, not because your intention is evil, but because it is based on a misunderstanding. It is based on the assumption that another person can be your permanent source of happiness, which is like assuming that a candle can be your permanent source of light. The candle will burn down. The wax will melt. The flame will flicker and go out. And if you have built your entire house around that one candle, if you have no other source of light, you will find yourself in total darkness when it is gone. The Buddha taught that true happiness comes from within, from the cultivation of wholesome mind states, from the practice of generosity, virtue, and mental development. This does not mean that relationships are unimportant or that we should not love. It means that we should love wisely, with the understanding that the other person is not responsible for our happiness, that they are a fellow traveler, not a destination, a companion on the path, not the path itself. There is a story from the Anguttara Nikaya that speaks to this with remarkable clarity. A householder came to the Buddha and said, "Lord, my wife and I love each other deeply. How can we ensure that we will be together in this life and in the next?" The Buddha's response was not what you might expect. He did not say, "Pray to the gods." He did not say, "Perform this ritual." He said, "If you wish to see each other in this life and in the next, you should both have the same faith, the same virtue, the same generosity, and the same wisdom. Then you will meet again." What the Buddha was saying, beneath the surface of his words, is that love is sustained not by desire but by alignment. Two people stay together not because they cling to each other, but because they are growing in the same direction. They are cultivating the same qualities. They are walking the same path. And when two people are truly aligned in this way, their connection is not a chain that binds them, but a river that carries them both toward the same sea. It is effortless, natural, and joyful, not because there are no challenges, but because the challenges are met together, with shared values and shared commitment. But what happens when the alignment breaks? What happens when one person begins to grow in one direction and the other in a different direction? What happens when the faith, the virtue, the generosity, the wisdom that once matched begin to diverge? Friends, this is where so many relationships struggle, and this is where the understanding of conditions becomes so crucial. Because when the alignment breaks, when the shared growth stops, the relationship does not simply continue as it was. It cannot. It is a conditioned phenomenon, and its conditions have changed. This does not mean that someone is to blame. Growth is not a linear process. People change at different rates, in different directions, for different reasons. The person who was perfectly aligned with you 5 years ago may be on a completely different trajectory today, not because they are bad, not because they do not love you, but because they are following the momentum of their own karma, their own intentions, their own unfolding understanding of what life means to them. And you, too, are following yours. And sometimes, those paths simply diverge, like two streams that flow from the same mountain but end up in different valleys. The pain of this divergence is real, friends. It is one of the most specific and piercing forms of suffering that human beings experience, because it involves not just loss, but the loss of a shared future, the dismantling of a story you had written together, the evaporation of plans and dreams and quiet assumptions about how the rest of your life would unfold. When a relationship ends, you do not just lose a person. You lose a version of your future. You lose the mornings you would have had together, the trips you would have taken, the arguments you would have resolved, the anniversaries you would have celebrated. You lose a whole world that existed only in the space between the two of you, a world that cannot survive the departure of either one. And this is why heartbreak is so disorienting. It is not just an emotional event. It is an ontological event, a disruption in the fabric of your reality. The world you were living in, the world that included this person as a central, load-bearing element, has collapsed, and you are standing in the rubble, trying to figure out which way is up, trying to remember who you were before this person came along and rearranged all the furniture in your heart. The Buddha would say, with great compassion, that this disorientation is itself a teacher. It is showing you, in the most vivid possible way, how much of your sense of self was dependent on another person, how much of your identity was constructed around the relationship, how much of what you called my life was actually our life, a shared creation that cannot exist without both creators. And in seeing this, in really seeing it, you have the opportunity to discover something that the relationship, for all its beauty, may have been hiding from you: your own wholeness, your own completeness, your own capacity to stand, alone, on the solid ground of your own being, without needing anyone else to prop you up. This is not the same as loneliness, friends. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected. Wholeness is the peace of knowing that you are enough. The Buddha found this wholeness under the Bodhi tree, not through a relationship, but through the most intimate relationship of all, the relationship with his own mind, his own heart, his own deepest nature. And he spent the rest of his life teaching others how to find it, not by rejecting love, but by understanding it, by seeing through the illusions that make love a source of suffering rather than a source of joy. There is a beautiful passage in the Udana, one of the shorter texts in the Pali Canon, where the Buddha describes the difference between worldly love and the love that is rooted in understanding. He says that worldly love is like a fire that feeds on fuel. As long as the fuel is present, the fire burns brightly. But when the fuel runs out, the fire dies. And the seeker of the fuel, the lover who is always looking for more fuel to keep the fire going, is never at peace, because they are always anxious, always afraid, always wondering when the fuel will run out. But the love that is rooted in understanding, the Buddha says, is like the cool, steady light of the moon. It does not depend on fuel. It does not consume what it illuminates. It simply shines, evenly, calmly, without heat, without smoke, without the anxiety of depletion. This kind of love, which the Buddhist tradition calls metta, or loving kindness, is not less than romantic love. It is more. It is vaster, more inclusive, more stable, more enduring. It is the love that says, I wish for your happiness, whether you are with me or not. I wish for your peace, whether you love me back or not. I wish for your freedom, even if that freedom takes you away from me. Now, I am not suggesting, friends, that everyone should abandon romantic love and live like monks. That is not what the Buddha taught, and it is not what this conversation is about. What I am suggesting is that romantic love, when it is infused with metta, when it is grounded in understanding and detached from the desperate need to possess, becomes something far more beautiful and far more resilient than the grasping, clinging, anxiety-ridden version of love that our culture tends to celebrate. It becomes love that can breathe. Love that has space. Love that allows each person to be who they are, to grow at their own pace, to change and evolve without the fear that every change will be interpreted as a threat to the relationship. And when this kind of love encounters loss, when the relationship ends despite the best efforts of both parties, the grief is different. It is cleaner. It is not contaminated by bitterness or blame. It is simply the natural sadness of parting, the gentle ache of letting go, the quiet acknowledgement that something beautiful has come to its natural end, like a song that has reached its final note, like a sunset that has given everything it has to the sky and now yields to the stars. The Buddha spoke of this quality of heart in connection with a concept called upekkha, which is usually translated as equanimity but which really means something much richer and more nuanced than the English word suggests. Upekkha is not indifference. It is not the cold, detached stance of someone who does not care. It is the warm, balanced, deeply compassionate acceptance of things as they are, the ability to hold both joy and sorrow in the same heart without being overwhelmed by either. It is the love that remains when the clinging has been released, the love that persists when the conditions have changed, the love that shines like the moon, steadily and without demand, on everything it touches. Cultivating upekkha in the context of love does not mean not feeling pain when a relationship ends. It means feeling the pain fully, completely, without resistance, and at the same time, holding it in a space of understanding that prevents it from turning into something toxic, something that poisons your view of love itself, something that makes you build walls around your heart and vow never to let anyone in again. Because here is the thing, friends. If you close your heart because you have been hurt, you are not protecting yourself. You are imprisoning yourself. You are locking yourself inside a fortress that keeps out not just the pain but also the joy, not just the heartbreak but also the connection, not just the risk but also the reward. The Buddha never taught his followers to close their hearts. He taught them to open their hearts wider and wider, until the heart was so vast, so spacious, so boundless, that no amount of suffering could fill it, no amount of loss could break it, no amount of change could shake it from its foundation of love. There is a story about a lay follower of the Buddha, a woman named Visakha, who was one of the most generous supporters of the Sangha and one of the most devoted practitioners among the laity. Visakha lost a grandchild, a young girl she had loved dearly, and she came to the Buddha in tears, her grief raw and unconcealed. The Buddha listened to her, let her express her pain without interruption, and then asked her a question that, at first glance, seems almost insensitive but is actually profoundly compassionate. He asked, "Visakha, how many people live in the city of Savatthi?" She answered, "Many, Lord. Perhaps several tens of thousands." The Buddha then asked, "If all of them were your grandchildren, and all of them were to die, how much grief would you feel?" Visakha, despite her tears, saw the point immediately. She said, "Lord, if all of them were my grandchildren, my grief would be unbearable. It would destroy me." The Buddha nodded and said, gently, "Visakha, those who have 100 dear ones have 100 sorrows. Those who have 90 dear ones have 90 sorrows. Those who have no dear ones have no sorrows." Now, this teaching has been misunderstood by many people over the centuries. They hear it and think the Buddha was saying, "Do not love anyone, and you will not suffer." But that is not what he was saying. He was describing a fact, not prescribing a strategy. He was pointing to the truth that love and sorrow are two sides of the same coin, that you cannot have one without the other, that the depth of your grief is a measure of the depth of your love. And in seeing this, in understanding this, you gain the freedom to choose consciously, to love with your eyes open, to embrace the joy of connection while accepting the inevitability of loss, to say yes to love knowing full well what love will cost you, because the alternative, a life without love, is not a life at all. It is merely an existence, safe but empty, protected but barren. And so, friends, when we think about the karmic dimension of love, when we contemplate the destiny that brings people together and the karma that shapes the course of their relationship, we are not engaging in a fatalistic exercise of, "It was all predetermined." We are engaging in a profound inquiry into the nature of cause and effect as it operates in the most intimate arena of human experience. We are asking, what did I bring to this relationship? What intentions did I carry? What seeds did I plant? And what fruits am I now harvesting? These are not easy questions. They require a level of honesty that most of us find deeply uncomfortable. It is much easier to blame the other person, to cast yourself as the innocent victim of someone else's cruelty or indifference, than to look at your own contribution to the dynamic. But the Buddha's teaching on karma insists that we look. It insists that we examine our own intentions, our own actions, our own patterns, because it is only by seeing clearly what we have done that we can understand what has happened to us, and it is only by understanding what has happened that we can begin to create something different. This does not mean blaming yourself for everything that went wrong. Self-blame is just another form of clinging, another way of keeping yourself at the center of the story, another way of refusing to accept that sometimes things happen because of causes and conditions that are far beyond your individual control. The karma that shapes a relationship is not just your karma. It is also the other person's karma. It is also the karma of the families you come from, the cultures you were raised in, the economic systems you operate within, the societal expectations that press upon you from every side. A relationship is not a simple, two-variable equation. It is a complex, multi-dimensional web of causes and effects, and no single person can be held solely responsible for its success or failure. But within that web, your intentions matter. Your choices matter. Your willingness to show up, to be honest, to be kind, to be patient, these things matter enormously, because they are the conditions that you contribute to the relationship, and they shape, in ways both visible and invisible, the quality of the experience you share with the other person. The Buddha told a story once, recorded in the commentary to the Dhammapada, about a couple in a previous life who had been deeply devoted to each other but whose devotion was mixed with possessiveness. The husband loved his wife, but he loved her the way a gardener loves a rare flower, not for the flower's own sake, but for the pleasure it gave him, for the pride he felt in possessing something so beautiful. And the wife loved her husband, but she loved him the way a bird loves the branch it perches on, not for the branch's own sake, but for the security it provided, for the fear of what would happen if the branch were to break. In their next life, they met again, drawn together by the residual karma of their shared attachment. And this time, the pattern repeated itself, but with different circumstances, different triggers, different surface details. The husband was still possessive, still treating his partner as something to be owned rather than someone to be honored. The wife was still dependent, still clinging to the relationship out of fear rather than love. And the result, predictably, was suffering for both of them, a relationship that looked good on the outside but was hollow on the inside, a gilded cage in which both birds were trapped. The teaching here is not that these two people were bad or that their love was fake. The teaching is that karma perpetuates patterns, and patterns, once established, tend to repeat themselves until they are seen, understood, and consciously changed. The husband needed to learn the difference between love and possession. The wife needed to learn the difference between love and dependence. And until those lessons were learned, until the underlying intentions were transformed, they would keep meeting, keep falling into the same dynamic, keep creating the same suffering, life after life after life. This is what the Buddhist tradition means when it speaks of the wheel of samsara, the cycle of repeated existence driven by ignorance and craving. In the context of love, samsara is the cycle of repeated relationship patterns, the tendency to keep choosing the same kind of partner, to keep making the same mistakes, to keep expecting different results from the same actions. We have all seen this, in ourselves and in others. The woman who keeps falling for unavailable men. The man who keeps pushing away anyone who gets too close. The couple who break up and get back together, trapped in a loop that neither of them seems able to escape. The Buddha's teaching on karma offers a way out of this loop, friends, but it is not a magic trick. It is a practice, a discipline, a commitment to looking at yourself honestly and choosing differently. It starts with seeing the pattern. It continues with understanding the intention behind the pattern. And it culminates in the deliberate cultivation of new intentions, new habits of mind, new ways of relating to yourself and to others that are rooted not in craving or aversion, but in wisdom and compassion. This is what it means to transform your karma, friends. Not to erase the past, because the past cannot be erased. Not to manipulate the future, because the future is not yours to control. But to change the quality of your present intentions, because the present is the only place where karma is being created, the only place where you have any real power, the only place where the course of your life can actually be altered. And when you change the quality of your intentions, when you move from possessiveness to generosity, from dependence to self-sufficiency, from fear to trust, the conditions of your relationships change as well, naturally and inevitably, because the conditions of your relationships are, in large part, a reflection of the conditions of your mind. And this reflection, this mirroring between the inner landscape of our minds and the outer landscape of our relationships, is something the Buddha understood with extraordinary depth. He saw that we do not simply stumble into love by accident, and we do not simply fall out of it by misfortune. We create the conditions for both, through the choices we make, the stories we tell ourselves, the habitual patterns of thought and emotion that run like invisible rivers beneath the surface of our daily lives, shaping everything they touch without our even being aware of them. Think about the way you first fell in love, friends. Think about that very first moment when you looked at someone and felt something shift inside you, something open, something awaken. What was actually happening in that moment? On the surface, it seemed like chemistry, attraction, fate, all those words we use when we do not fully understand what is going on. But beneath the surface, something far more complex was at work. Your mind was recognizing a pattern. Your heart was responding to a set of signals, some conscious, most unconscious, that resonated with your deepest needs, your oldest wounds, your most cherished hopes. You were not falling in love with a person. You were falling in love with what that person represented to you, with the story your mind was writing about them before you even knew their middle name. The Buddha would not have been surprised by this, friends. He spent 45 years teaching about the way the mind constructs experience, the way we project our desires and fears onto the world and then react to our own projections as though they were reality. In the Honeyballer Sutta, the Madhyupindika Sutta, he laid out, in precise and almost mathematical detail, the process by which contact between the senses and their objects gives rise to feeling, feeling gives rise to perception, perception gives rise to thinking, and thinking gives rise to the proliferation of concepts that we then mistake for the way things actually are. This proliferation, this papanka, is the engine of delusion, and it operates nowhere more powerfully than in the realm of romantic love. When you fall in love, your mind goes into overdrive, generating stories, fantasies, expectations, interpretations, at a speed that would put any novelist to shame. You take a single smile and build an entire future out of it. You take a single kind word and construct a whole character around it. You take a single moment of connection and inflate it into a narrative of destiny, of soulmates, of two people who were clearly, obviously, undeniably meant to be together. And this narrative feels so real, so vivid, so emotionally compelling, that questioning it feels like blasphemy, like denying the most sacred experience of your life. But the Buddha, gently, lovingly, with no desire to hurt but every desire to heal, would ask you to question it. Not to destroy it. Not to strip the color from your experience and leave you with nothing but gray, analytical detachment. But to see it clearly, to understand what is happening in your mind when you fall in love, so that you can love more wisely, more freely, more fully, without the unconscious projections and desperate clingings that turn love from a source of joy into a source of suffering. There is a story from the time of the Buddha that illustrates this with painful clarity. It concerns a young man named Nanda, not the same Nanda we might have encountered in other stories, but a different Nanda, a householder in the city of Rajagaha, who fell deeply, desperately, all-consumingly in love with a courtesan named Janapada Kalyani, a woman renowned throughout the kingdom for her extraordinary beauty. Nanda did not just love her. He was obsessed with her. He thought about her from the moment he woke up until the moment he fell asleep, and even in his dreams, her face appeared, luminous and untouchable, like a star he could see but never reach. Nanda did everything he could to win her affection. He spent his wealth on gifts for her. He composed songs in her honor. He neglected his business, his family, his health, all in the pursuit of a woman who, in truth, he barely knew. What he knew was the image of her that he had constructed in his mind, the projection he had cast upon her, the fantasy he had built around a few conversations and a handful of glances. The real woman, with her own complexities, her own fears, her own inner life, was almost irrelevant to him. He was in love with his own creation, not with her. When Nanda finally managed to spend time with her, when the reality of who she actually was began to emerge from behind the screen of his projections, he was devastated. She was not the goddess he had imagined. She was a human being, complicated and imperfect, with her own agenda, her own needs, her own version of the story that did not match his at all. The dissonance between his fantasy and the reality was so painful that it shattered something in him, not just his heart, but his entire framework for understanding love. In his confusion and despair, Nanda sought out the Buddha, and the conversation that followed is one of the most psychologically astute exchanges in all of Buddhist literature. The Buddha did not tell Nanda that love was bad or that desire was sinful. He simply asked Nanda to look carefully at what had actually happened, to trace the chain of events from the initial contact, through the proliferation of mental constructs, through the building of expectations, through the inevitable collision with reality, to the suffering he was now experiencing. As Nanda looked, really looked, he began to see the pattern. He saw that his suffering was not caused by the woman. It was caused by the gap between his projection of her and the reality of her. It was caused by papanka, by the mind's tendency to take a small piece of experience and elaborate it into a vast, emotionally charged narrative that bears only a passing resemblance to what is actually happening. He saw that he had been in love not with a person but with a story, and that the story had been written entirely by his own mind. This is one of the most liberating and most uncomfortable insights that the Buddhist path offers regarding love, friends. It does not say that love is an illusion. It says that much of what we call love is actually projection, a complex web of desires, fears, memories, and expectations that we cast over another person like a net, and then mistake the net for the person. The real person, the actual, living, breathing human being who stands before you, is almost always different from the one you have constructed in your mind. And the moment you begin to see the real person, the relationship enters a critical phase, a phase that will determine whether the love deepens into something genuine and enduring or collapses under the weight of unmet expectations. This is the point at which many relationships fail, friends, and it is the point at which understanding karma becomes especially important. Because the projections you cast, the expectations you build, the fantasies you indulge in, these are not random. They are conditioned by your past experiences, your childhood wounds, your cultural programming, your karmic inheritance. The woman who keeps falling for men who cannot commit is not making a random selection from the available options. She is drawn to that type of man because of deeply conditioned patterns in her own psyche, patterns that may stretch back not just to childhood but to previous lives, patterns that will continue to operate, automatically and unconsciously, until they are brought into the light of awareness and examined with honesty and courage. The Buddha called this process of examining our patterns yoniso manasikara, which is usually translated as wise attention or careful consideration, and he considered it one of the most important qualities a person can develop. Yoniso manasikara is the practice of looking beneath the surface of your experience, of asking not just, what happened, but, why did it happen? What conditions gave rise to it? What role did my own mind play in creating this situation? It is the practice of turning the searchlight of awareness inward, toward the hidden mechanisms of your own psyche, rather than outward, toward the convenient but ultimately unhelpful exercise of blaming others for your suffering. In the context of love, yoniso manasikara means asking yourself some difficult questions. Why am I attracted to this person? What need are they fulfilling in me? Am I seeing them clearly, or am I seeing my projection of them? What am I afraid of in this relationship? What am I clinging to? What would happen if I let go of my expectations and simply allowed the relationship to be what it is, rather than forcing it to be what I want it to be? These questions are not comfortable, friends. They require a level of self-honesty that most of us instinctively avoid, because looking at the truth of our own motivations can be deeply unsettling. It is much more pleasant to believe that we are in love because fate brought us together, because the stars aligned, because we are soulmates destined for each other. And perhaps there is some truth in those romantic notions, in the sense that karmic conditions do play a role in bringing people together. But the quality of what happens after the meeting, the quality of the actual relationship, is determined not by fate but by intention, not by destiny but by choice, not by the stars but by the quality of attention and care that each person brings to the partnership. The Buddha demonstrated this principle in his own life, in a way that is often overlooked. Before his renunciation, before he left the palace to seek enlightenment, he was married to Yasodhara, a woman of extraordinary character and devotion. Their relationship, as described in the texts, was not a fairy tale of effortless bliss. It was a deep, complex, multi-layered bond that encompassed love, duty, shared history, and ultimately, profound mutual sacrifice. When Siddhartha left the palace in the middle of the night, leaving behind his sleeping wife and newborn son, he was not rejecting love. He was pursuing a love so vast, so all-encompassing, that it could not be contained within the walls of a single relationship. And Yasodhara, for her part, did not respond to his departure with bitterness or rage. She responded with a dignity and a depth of understanding that are truly awe-inspiring. She recognized that the man she loved was driven by a force greater than personal happiness, that his departure was not a betrayal but a calling, and that her role in the story was not diminished by his absence. She continued to live with integrity, to raise their son Rahula with wisdom and care, and when the time came, she joined the Sangha herself, attaining full awakening and proving that the karmic bond between her and the Buddha was not destroyed by their physical separation but transformed into something even more profound. This transformation, friends, is perhaps the most radical teaching that Buddhism offers about love. It says that love does not have to die when a relationship ends. It can transform. It can evolve. It can take on new forms that are equally valid, equally beautiful, equally real. The love between Siddhartha and Yasodhara did not end when he left the palace. It changed shape. It went from being the love of husband and wife to being the love of two beings committed to the same ultimate goal, the liberation of all sentient beings from suffering. And in that transformation, it became something far greater than it could ever have been within the confines of a conventional marriage. This possibility of transformation is available to all of us, friends, in our own far less dramatic, far less historically significant relationships. When a romantic partnership ends, the love does not have to be thrown away like a broken vase. It can be recycled, repurposed, transformed into something new. The ex-partner can become a friend, a co-parent, a distant but warmly regarded fellow traveler on the road of life. The love can become metta, can become a quiet, steady wish for the other person's happiness that does not depend on their presence in your life. This transformation is not easy. It requires grief, letting go, time, and above all, the willingness to see the situation clearly rather than through the distorting lens of hurt and resentment. But it is possible. The Buddha's own life proves it. And the lives of countless practitioners over the centuries, people who have turned heartbreak into wisdom, loss into liberation, the end of a relationship into the beginning of a deeper understanding of themselves and of the nature of love, prove it as well. Now, friends, there is another dimension to this conversation about fate and karma in love that we have not yet explored, and it has to do with the concept of what the Buddhist tradition calls the 4 types of karmic relationships. This framework, which comes primarily from the commentarial tradition rather than from the suttas directly, offers a way of understanding why different relationships have such different flavors, such different dynamics, such different outcomes. The first type is the relationship of gratitude, where two beings meet because of a karmic debt of kindness. In a previous life, one person did something deeply good for the other, and the resulting karma creates a pull, a natural affinity, that brings them together again. This type of relationship tends to feel easy, harmonious, blessed. The two people seem to understand each other effortlessly, to support each other naturally, to bring out the best in each other without even trying. They are, in the popular parlance, meant for each other, and in a karmic sense, this is true, they are together because the conditions of past goodness have ripened into present harmony. The second type is the relationship of reciprocation, where two beings meet because of a karmic debt that needs to be balanced. Perhaps in a previous life, one person harmed the other, and the karma of that harm creates a connection that brings them back together, not for revenge, but for resolution. This type of relationship tends to be more complicated, more challenging, more fraught with misunderstanding and friction. The two people may love each other deeply but find themselves locked in recurring patterns of conflict that neither of them fully understands. The relationship feels important, necessary, even destined, but it is also exhausting, confusing, and sometimes painful. The third type is the relationship of shared aspiration, where two beings meet because of a shared commitment made in a previous life, a vow to practice together, to support each other's spiritual growth, to walk the path side by side. This type of relationship has a quality of depth and purpose that goes beyond ordinary romantic attachment. The two people feel not just attracted to each other but called to each other, as if they have work to do together, lessons to learn, a shared mission to fulfill. These relationships can be deeply fulfilling but also deeply demanding, because the shared aspiration pushes both people to grow in ways that are sometimes uncomfortable but always transformative. The fourth type is the relationship of letting go, where two beings meet specifically so that one or both of them can learn the lesson of release. This is perhaps the most painful type of relationship, because it is designed, if we can use that word loosely, not to last. The two people come together with great intensity, great passion, great feeling, and then, at some point, the relationship ends, and the ending is the point. The lesson is not in the coming together. The lesson is in the letting go. The karma between them is the karma of attachment itself, and the relationship serves as the arena in which that attachment is confronted, examined, and ultimately transcended. Now, friends, I want to be very careful here, because this framework, while beautiful and helpful, can also be misused. It can become an excuse for staying in harmful relationships, for tolerating abuse on the grounds that, it is my karma, for refusing to leave a situation that is destroying you because you believe you have a karmic debt to repay. The Buddha never taught passivity in the face of harm. He never taught that karma means you must accept suffering without trying to change your circumstances. Karma is about understanding the causes and conditions of your experience, not about resigning yourself to them. If you are in a relationship that is causing you harm, the karmic lesson may not be to endure but to leave. The karmic lesson may be to develop the courage and self-respect to say, this is not acceptable, and I deserve better. The karmic lesson may be to break the pattern of accepting mistreatment that has been running through your life, and perhaps through many lives, and to finally, decisively, choose a different path. The Buddha told a story once about a deer that kept returning to a particular clearing in the forest, even though a hunter had set traps there. The deer had been coming to that clearing for many seasons, drawn by the sweet grass that grew there, the familiar trees, the comfortable sense of knowing the place. But each time the deer returned, it came closer and closer to the traps, until one day, it stepped into one and was caught. The Buddha used this story to illustrate the danger of habitual patterns, the way we keep returning to the same situations, the same dynamics, the same types of relationships, drawn by the familiarity, by the sweetness of what we remember, by the comfort of what we know, even when the evidence clearly shows that the situation is dangerous, that the traps are there, that continuing on this path will lead to suffering. The karmic lesson, in this case, is not to keep returning to the clearing. The karmic lesson is to find a different clearing, one where the grass may be less sweet but the ground is safe. And this, friends, leads us to one of the most practical and most important aspects of the Buddhist teaching on love and karma, which is the concept of right relationship. The Buddha did not simply describe how relationships work. He also taught how to make them work better, how to create the conditions for healthy, harmonious, mutually enriching partnerships that are rooted not in craving and attachment but in respect, kindness, and shared growth. In the Sigalovada Sutta, sometimes called the layperson's code of discipline, the Buddha laid out the mutual responsibilities of husband and wife with a specificity and practicality that is quite remarkable. He said that a husband should honor his wife, should not disrespect her, should be faithful to her, should share authority with her, and should provide her with adornments, which in the context of that era meant ensuring her material comfort and recognizing her worth. And a wife, in turn, should manage the household well, should be hospitable to their families and friends, should be faithful, should protect what is earned, and should be skillful and industrious in all her duties. Now, we might look at this list and think it is quaint, a product of a patriarchal society with rigid gender roles that no longer apply. And in its specific details, that is partly true. But beneath the surface, the principle is timeless, the principle that a healthy relationship is one in which both parties actively, consciously, and generously contribute to the well-being of the other. It is not a one-way street. It is not a transaction. It is a partnership of mutual care, in which each person's actions are motivated not by obligation or fear but by genuine concern for the other's happiness. And this brings us back to the question of karma, because the quality of your contribution to a relationship is itself a form of karma. Every time you choose to speak kindly rather than harshly, you are planting a seed of future harmony. Every time you choose to listen rather than lecture, you are creating a condition for deeper understanding. Every time you choose to forgive rather than hold a grudge, you are breaking a link in the chain of resentment that might otherwise stretch across lifetimes. And every time you choose to be honest rather than deceptive, even when honesty is difficult, even when the truth is uncomfortable, you are laying the foundation for a trust that can weather any storm. The Buddha was once approached by a young couple who had been married for a short time and were already struggling. They loved each other, they said, but they could not seem to stop arguing. Every conversation turned into a battle. Every disagreement escalated into a full-blown war. They were exhausted, confused, and beginning to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake by marrying each other. The Buddha listened with his characteristic patience and then asked them a question that seemed, at first, completely unrelated to their problem. He asked, "When you were children, how did your parents speak to each other?" The young couple looked at each other, startled. The husband admitted that his parents had argued constantly, loudly, violently. The wife said that her parents had been cold and distant, rarely speaking at all, their silence a thick, oppressive blanket that smothered any possibility of intimacy. The Buddha nodded and said, gently, "You have each brought your parents' marriage into your own. The husband has learned that conflict is the language of love, and the wife has learned that silence is the only safe response to pain. Neither of you is wrong. Neither of you is to blame. You are simply repeating what was modeled for you, what was imprinted on your minds before you were old enough to choose differently." He then taught them the practice of mindful speech, of pausing before responding, of examining their intentions before opening their mouths, of asking themselves, "Is what I am about to say true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it the right time?" He told them that if they could learn to speak to each other with the same care and consideration they would give to a guest in their home, their relationship would transform. Not overnight. Not without effort. But gradually, steadily, as new patterns replaced the old ones, as the karmic momentum of their parents' relationships was redirected by the conscious intention to do things differently. This teaching, friends, is as relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago. Because the patterns we inherit from our families, the karmic imprints of how love was modeled for us in childhood, are among the most powerful forces shaping our adult relationships. They operate beneath the level of conscious awareness, influencing our choices, our reactions, our expectations, in ways that we rarely recognize until someone, like the Buddha, holds up a mirror and says, "Look. See what you are carrying. See where it came from. And know that you have the power to put it down." That power, the power to put down what no longer serves you, the power to choose a different response, a different pattern, a different way of being in relationship, is perhaps the most precious gift that awareness offers us. It is not a power that comes from outside. No one can give it to you. No teacher, no partner, no therapist, no amount of reading or listening can hand it to you on a silver tray. It arises from within, from the simple but radical act of paying attention to what is actually happening in your mind and heart, moment by moment, without flinching, without editing, without looking away. The Buddha called this sati, mindfulness, and he considered it so essential to the path of liberation that he made it the seventh factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, the very roadmap he offered for ending suffering. But sati is not just a meditation technique to be practiced on a cushion for 30 minutes a day. It is a way of living, a way of being present to the full richness and complexity of your experience, including the experience of love, of loss, of longing, of the ache that sits in your chest when you think of someone who is no longer there. When you bring mindfulness to your experience of love, something very interesting happens. You begin to see the difference between love and attachment, between genuine caring and the desperate need to hold on. You begin to notice the moments when your love tips over into clinging, when your appreciation of the other person's presence turns into a fear of their absence, when your enjoyment of the relationship becomes contaminated by anxiety about its future. And in noticing these transitions, these subtle shifts from love to fear, from openness to grasping, you gain the ability to catch yourself, to pause, to breathe, and to choose a different response. This is not about being perfect, friends. It is not about achieving some idealized state of detached serenity in which nothing touches you and you float through your relationships like a cloud drifting through the sky. That is not love. That is avoidance wearing the mask of spirituality. Real mindfulness in love is messy, vulnerable, raw, and deeply human. It means feeling the full force of your emotions while maintaining enough awareness to not be swept away by them. It means allowing yourself to love passionately, intensely, wholeheartedly, while keeping one eye on the ground beneath your feet, knowing that the ground can shift at any moment, and being okay with that knowledge rather than terrified by it. There is a story from the Jataka tales that captures this balance beautifully. In a previous life, the Bodhisattva was born as a king of a small but prosperous kingdom, a just and wise ruler who was beloved by his people. He had a queen whom he loved deeply, a woman of intelligence, grace, and considerable spiritual depth. Their relationship was one of genuine partnership, marked by mutual respect, open communication, and a shared commitment to governing with compassion and fairness. One day, a wandering ascetic came to the palace and, after being received with hospitality, spoke to the king about the nature of attachment. He said, "Great king, you have everything a man could desire. A beautiful queen, a thriving kingdom, the respect of your people. But tell me, if all of this were taken from you tomorrow, what would remain? Would you still know who you are? Would you still be at peace?" The king sat with this question for a long time. He did not dismiss it as irrelevant or impractical, the way many people dismiss uncomfortable questions that threaten the foundations of their comfort. He took it seriously. He contemplated it during his morning walks, during his evening meals, during the quiet hours before sleep. And gradually, he began to see that his love for his queen, which he had always considered pure and selfless, contained within it a thread of fear, a thin but persistent anxiety about losing her, about being left alone, about the inevitable day when death would separate them. He shared this insight with his queen, not in a spirit of confession or crisis, but in the spirit of honest inquiry that defined their relationship. And his queen, being the remarkable woman she was, did not react with hurt or defensiveness. She said, "I have felt the same fear, my love. I have noticed it in myself, that slight clenching of the heart when I think about what would happen if you were to go. And I have wondered, is it possible to love someone completely and yet hold them lightly? Is it possible to give yourself fully to a relationship while remaining free within it?" They decided to explore this question together, not by withdrawing from each other, not by creating artificial distance, but by bringing more awareness to their love, more honesty to their communication, more willingness to see the impermanent nature of their connection without being devastated by it. They practiced, in their own way, what we might call mindful love, a love that is fully engaged but not enslaved, fully present but not dependent, fully committed but not blind. The Jataka tells us that this practice deepened their relationship in ways they had not anticipated. By acknowledging the impermanence of their bond, they stopped taking it for granted. By facing the possibility of loss, they began to treasure every moment of presence. By releasing the fear of separation, they found a freedom within the relationship that made it more joyful, more spacious, more alive. They loved each other more, not less, when they stopped trying to hold on to each other. Because what they were holding on to was not love. It was fear. And when the fear was released, what remained was love in its purest, most luminous form. This is the paradox at the heart of the Buddhist understanding of love, friends. The tighter you grip, the more you lose. The more you try to control, the less control you have. The more you demand permanence, the more you suffer from impermanence. But when you open your hands, when you let go of the demand that love be something other than what it is, you discover that love does not need to be held. It holds itself. It flows naturally, like water finding its own level, like light filling a room, like breath entering and leaving the body without any effort on your part. And this brings us to something that many people in the grip of heartbreak find extremely difficult to accept, something that the Buddha taught with characteristic directness, and that is the teaching on the second arrow. In the Salatha Sutta, the Buddha described human suffering using the metaphor of being struck by arrows. The first arrow, he said, is the unavoidable pain of life, the pain of loss, of change, of things not going the way we want them to go. This first arrow strikes everyone, enlightened or not, wise or foolish, monk or layperson. It is part of the deal of being alive in a body, in a world of impermanence. But the second arrow, the Buddha said, is the one we shoot at ourselves. It is the suffering we add on top of the original pain through our mental reactions, through our resistance, through our, "why me," and our, "this is not fair," and our, "I cannot bear this," and our endless replaying of what went wrong and who said what and how things could have been different if only, if only, if only. The second arrow is the story we tell ourselves about our pain, and it is this story, not the pain itself, that causes the deepest, most enduring suffering. In the context of love, the first arrow is the pain of separation. Someone you love has left. The relationship has ended. The person who was the center of your world is gone. This pain is real, and the Buddha would never tell you not to feel it. Feel it. Let it move through you. Let it do what pain does, which is to crack you open, to reveal the depth of your capacity for love, to show you how much this person meant to you. This is the first arrow, and it is, in its own way, sacred. It is the price of having loved, and it is a price worth paying. But the second arrow, friends, is the one you do not have to accept. The second arrow is the bitterness, the resentment, the self-blame, the obsessive replaying of memories, the catastrophic thinking about the future, the conviction that you will never love again, that you are fundamentally unlovable, that every relationship you enter will end in the same way. The second arrow is the story that your mind constructs around the pain, the elaborate, detailed, emotionally charged narrative in which the pain is not just pain but proof of your unworthiness, your failure, your fundamental inadequacy as a human being. The Buddha's teaching is clear, friends. You cannot avoid the first arrow. But you can learn to not shoot the second one. And the way you learn this is through mindfulness, through the practice of observing your mental reactions without being swept up in them, of seeing the stories your mind tells without believing them automatically, of feeling the pain without adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from resistance and self-judgment. This is easier said than done, of course. When your heart is breaking, the last thing you want to do is observe your mental reactions with calm, detached awareness. You want to scream. You want to cry. You want to call the person who left you and beg them to come back. You want to eat an entire cake or drink an entire bottle of wine or drive to their house at 2 in the morning and demand an explanation. These impulses are human, friends, deeply, thoroughly, universally human, and the Buddha would not shame you for having them. But he would gently point out that acting on them will not help. He would gently remind you that the pain you are feeling, as intense and all-consuming as it seems right now, is temporary. It is a conditioned phenomenon, arising from causes and conditions, and it will pass when those causes and conditions change. He would say, with the quiet confidence of someone who has seen the truth of impermanence with perfect clarity, this too shall pass. Not because it does not matter. Not because it is not real. But because that is the nature of all conditioned things. They arise. They persist for a time. And they pass away. Your pain will follow this same pattern. It will arise. It will persist. And it will pass. Your job is not to fight it or to fix it or to make it go away. Your job is simply to be present with it, to hold it with compassion, to let it teach you what it has to teach, and then, when it is ready, to let it go. There is a story from the Dhammapada commentary about a woman named Kisa Gautami, and while her story is well known for its teaching about death and impermanence, there is a less famous aspect of her story that is directly relevant to what we are discussing. Before the tragedy that brought her to the Buddha, before the loss of her child that is the central event of her story, Kisa Gautami had another, quieter heartbreak. She had been in love with a young man from her village, a man she had grown up with, a man she had assumed she would marry. But the man's family considered Kisa Gautami beneath their station. She was from a poor family, thin and frail, and they arranged for him to marry someone else. Kisa Gautami did not rage against this. She did not create a scene. She simply absorbed the blow, quietly, the way she had absorbed so many blows in her life, the poverty, the mockery of other children, the constant feeling of being less than. But the pain settled into her like a stone dropped into still water, sinking to the bottom and sitting there, undisturbed but ever present. And it was this pain, this silent, unprocessed, unexpressed heartbreak, that made her cling so desperately to her child when he was born, because the child represented everything she had ever wanted, love that could not be taken away, a bond that no one could dissolve, a permanence that would finally, at last, prove that she was worthy of being loved. Of course, as we know, the child died. And Kisa Gotami's grief was so extreme, so total, that it drove her to the edge of madness. But what the Buddha saw, when he looked at her with his compassionate, all-seeing eyes, was not just a mother grieving a child. He saw a woman grieving a lifetime of unacknowledged losses, a woman whose heart had been broken long before her child died, a woman who had never learned to process pain, to sit with it, to let it move through her, because she had always been too busy surviving, too busy proving herself, too busy trying to earn the love that should have been given freely. When the Buddha sent her on her famous quest, when he asked her to find a house that had not been touched by death, he was not simply teaching her about the universality of loss. He was giving her something she had never had, the permission to grieve. The permission to walk from house to house, to hear story after story of other people's losses, to feel her own pain reflected in the pain of strangers, and to understand, gradually, gently, that she was not alone. That loss was not her personal punishment. That heartbreak was not proof of her unworthiness. That the pain she had been carrying, silently, for so many years, was not a sign that something was wrong with her, but a sign that she had a heart capable of deep, fierce, magnificent love. This, friends, is what the Buddhist teaching on love and karma ultimately offers us. Not a way to avoid pain, because pain cannot be avoided. Not a way to control love, because love cannot be controlled. Not a way to guarantee that our relationships will last forever, because nothing lasts forever. But a way to understand, to see clearly, to meet our experience with a wisdom that transforms suffering into growth, and loss into liberation. When you understand that the person who broke your heart was not a villain but a fellow traveler, shaped by their own karma, driven by their own conditioning, struggling with their own pain, your anger begins to soften. Not immediately. Not easily. But gradually, like ice melting in the spring sun, the hard, cold wall of resentment begins to give way to something warmer, something more fluid, something that allows you to see the other person not as the cause of your suffering but as a co-participant in a karmic dance that neither of you fully understood or controlled. And when you understand that your own patterns, your own choices, your own conditioned reactions played a role in the dynamic of the relationship, not as blame but as honest assessment, you gain something infinitely precious, the power to change. Because if your suffering were entirely caused by someone else, you would be helpless. You would be a victim, forever at the mercy of other people's decisions. But if your suffering is at least partly rooted in your own conditioned patterns, then you have agency. You have the ability to examine those patterns, to understand them, to work with them, and ultimately, to transform them. This is the essence of what the Buddha meant by karma, friends. Not a cosmic system of reward and punishment, not a deterministic script that locks you into a predetermined destiny, but a dynamic, living process of cause and effect in which your present intentions have the power to reshape your future experience. The karma of your past relationships has brought you to where you are now. But the karma of your present intentions will determine where you go next. And in every moment, in every breath, in every choice you make about how to respond to your pain, how to treat the people around you, how to open or close your heart, you are creating new karma, planting new seeds, setting new conditions in motion that will bear fruit in ways you cannot yet imagine. There is a teaching from the Samyutta Nikaya that says, "What you think upon, that you become." This is not mystical or magical. It is simply the recognition that the patterns of your mind shape the patterns of your life. If you spend your days thinking about betrayal, about loss, about the unfairness of love, you will create conditions for more betrayal, more loss, more unfairness, not because the universe is punishing you, but because your mind is tuned to those frequencies, and what you are tuned to is what you pick up. You will see evidence of betrayal everywhere, even where none exists. You will interpret neutral events through the lens of past hurt. You will approach new relationships with such a thick layer of defensive armor that no one can reach you, and then you will wonder why you feel so alone. But if you can shift the frequency, friends, if you can retune your mind to kindness, to generosity, to the genuine wish for your own happiness and the happiness of others, then the conditions of your experience will begin to shift as well. New possibilities will emerge. New connections will form. New doors will open, doors that were always there but that you could not see because you were looking in the wrong direction. The Buddha told a remarkable story about a man named Surya, not the same one we might have encountered elsewhere, but a different telling that emphasizes the transformative power of shifting one's intentions. This man had spent years cultivating jealousy, envy, and possessiveness in his relationships, treating every partner as a possession to be guarded rather than a person to be cherished. And predictably, every relationship he entered ended badly, because people do not thrive when they are treated as property. They wither. They pull away. They look for the exit. After years of this pattern, after being left by partner after partner, Surya was desolate. He felt that love itself had rejected him, that the universe had decided he was unworthy of companionship. But when he heard the Buddha's teaching on karma, he had a revelation that changed the course of his life. He realized that the universe had not rejected him. He had rejected love. Or more precisely, he had been offering a counterfeit version of love, a love that was really control, a love that was really fear, a love that was really the desperate attempt to fill an emptiness inside himself by possessing another person, and the universe had simply reflected back to him the quality of what he was offering. With this understanding, Surya began the slow, difficult, immensely rewarding process of changing his inner orientation. He practiced metta meditation, cultivating genuine goodwill toward himself and others. He practiced generosity, learning to give without expecting anything in return. He practiced honest self-reflection, examining his motivations with courage and humility. And over time, as his inner conditions changed, his outer circumstances changed as well. Not dramatically, not overnight, not in the fairy tale fashion of, and then he met the perfect person and lived happily ever after. But gradually, steadily, in the quiet, unglamorous way that real transformation always occurs. He began to attract different people into his life, people who resonated with the new frequency he was broadcasting, people who were drawn not to his status or his appearance or his possessions but to the quality of his presence, the warmth of his heart, the genuineness of his care. He discovered that love, real love, the kind that nourishes rather than depletes, the kind that liberates rather than imprisons, was not something he had to chase or capture or hold on to. It was something that arose naturally, spontaneously, effortlessly, when the conditions were right. And the conditions, he now understood, were not about finding the right person. They were about becoming the right person, about cultivating within himself the qualities that he wanted to find in a partner. This is one of the great reversals that the Buddhist path offers, friends. We spend most of our lives looking outward for love, scanning the horizon for the person who will complete us, who will fill our emptiness, who will make us whole. And the Buddha says, with a gentle smile that holds a lifetime of compassion, you are already whole. You have always been whole. The emptiness you feel is not a deficiency in your being. It is a misunderstanding about your being. And the person you are looking for, the one who will finally make everything okay, is not out there. That person is you. This does not mean that relationships are unnecessary or that solitude is superior to partnership. The Buddha never taught that. He recognized and honored the beauty of human connection, the richness of shared life, the incomparable sweetness of loving and being loved. But he also saw, with perfect clarity, that a relationship built on the foundation of two incomplete people trying to complete each other is a house built on sand. It might look beautiful for a while. It might even feel stable. But when the storms come, and storms always come, it will collapse, because its foundation was never solid. A relationship built on the foundation of two whole people choosing to share their wholeness, on the other hand, is a house built on rock. It can withstand the storms. It can weather the changes. It can survive the inevitable shifts and upheavals that life throws at every partnership, because it is not dependent on the other person for its stability. Each person brings their own stability, their own wholeness, their own inner peace to the relationship, and the relationship becomes not a crutch but a celebration, not a desperate clinging but a joyful sharing, not a prison but a garden where two already complete beings grow together, enriching each other's lives without diminishing their own. And growing together, friends, does not mean growing into the same shape. It does not mean becoming copies of each other, thinking the same thoughts, wanting the same things, losing the boundaries between where one person ends and the other begins. That is not love. That is fusion, and fusion is just another form of attachment, another way of trying to make the impermanent permanent by merging two separate beings into one and hoping that the merged entity will be immune to the changes that inevitably come. The Buddha understood the importance of individuality within connection. He never asked his followers to erase their personalities or abandon their uniqueness. He asked them to understand themselves, deeply and honestly, and to bring that understanding into every relationship they entered. He asked them to be like trees in a forest, each one rooted in its own ground, drawing nourishment from its own roots, reaching toward the sky with its own branches, yet connected underground through a vast, invisible network of shared soil and intertwined roots. The trees in a forest do not compete for sunlight by trying to become each other. They compete by growing taller, by reaching higher, by becoming more fully and authentically themselves. And in doing so, they create a canopy that shelters the entire forest, a collective beauty that no single tree could achieve alone. Love, at its healthiest, works the same way. Two people, rooted in their own wholeness, growing in their own direction, yet connected by something deep and real that does not require them to sacrifice their individuality for the sake of the relationship. When this kind of love is present, the relationship becomes a space of freedom rather than constraint, a place where each person is encouraged to grow, to explore, to become more fully who they are, without the fear that growth will be interpreted as betrayal, that change will be seen as a threat, that becoming more of yourself will somehow mean becoming less of a partner. But when this kind of love is absent, when the relationship is built on the need to possess rather than the willingness to share, when one or both partners feel that their identity is threatened by the other person's growth, then the relationship becomes a cage, and the bars of that cage are made not of iron but of fear, not of cruelty but of insecurity, not of malice but of the deeply human, deeply understandable, deeply compassionate terror of being left behind. The Buddha saw this fear clearly, friends. He saw it in the eyes of the monks who could not let go of their attachments. He saw it in the tears of the householders who came to him seeking advice about their troubled marriages. He saw it in his own heart, before his awakening, when the thought of losing Yasodhara and Rahula was a weight that pressed against his chest like a stone. And he did not dismiss this fear or deny it or tell people to simply stop feeling it. He did something far more radical, far more compassionate, far more effective. He said, "Look at this fear. Really look at it. What is it made of? What is at its center? What would happen if you walked into it instead of away from it?" And when his followers did this, when they summoned the courage to look directly at their fear of loss, they discovered something astonishing. They discovered that the fear was not solid. It was not a wall. It was more like a curtain, thin and translucent, and when they pushed through it, they found on the other side not the catastrophe they had imagined but a vast, open space of peace and freedom. They found that the thing they had been running from their entire lives, the fear of losing what they loved, was far less terrible than the exhausting, never-ending act of running itself. This is what the Buddha means by liberation, friends. Not the absence of love, but the absence of fear within love. Not the rejection of connection, but the release of clinging within connection. Not the cold, sterile detachment of someone who has given up on life, but the warm, vibrant, fully engaged presence of someone who has stopped fighting the truth of impermanence and has instead made peace with it, has befriended it, has discovered that impermanence is not the enemy of love but its most intimate companion. There is a passage in the Therigatha, in the poems of the elder nuns, that expresses this with heartbreaking simplicity. A nun named Sumangalamata, who had endured a difficult marriage before her ordination, wrote a poem that begins with a cry of relief. She speaks of being freed from the mortar and pestle of domestic drudgery, freed from the husband who humiliated her, freed from the repetitive, soul-crushing labor that had defined her life. But as the poem continues, her tone shifts from relief to something deeper, something more nuanced. She speaks not just of what she has been freed from, but of what she has been freed into, a vast interior space of calm, of clarity, of a love that does not depend on any external condition but arises from the deepest well of her own being. Sumangalamata was not speaking against love itself. She was speaking against the particular form of love she had experienced, a love distorted by power imbalance, by lack of respect, by the failure to see her as a full human being deserving of dignity and care. And her liberation was not a rejection of all relationship but a claiming of her right to exist outside of a relationship that diminished her, a declaration that her worth was not defined by her usefulness to a man, that her life had value and meaning and beauty on its own terms. This is a teaching that resonates powerfully in our own time, friends, in an era when so many people, women and men alike, pour themselves into relationships that drain rather than nourish, that take rather than give, that leave them emptier than they were before. The Buddha's teaching does not tell you to stay in such a relationship out of duty or karma or some misguided sense of spiritual obligation. It tells you that you have the right, and indeed the responsibility, to examine the conditions of your life honestly and to make choices that are aligned with your own well-being and growth. And sometimes, friends, the most loving thing you can do is leave. The most compassionate action is to walk away. The deepest expression of metta is to say, I love you, but I cannot continue to lose myself in this relationship. I love you, but love that costs me my dignity, my peace, my sense of self, is a love I can no longer afford. I love you, and part of loving you is letting you go, so that both of us can find a way of being that does not require the other to shrink. This kind of leaving is not abandonment. It is not betrayal. It is not the failure of love. It is love's most courageous act, the act of choosing wholeness over habit, truth over comfort, growth over stagnation. And the karma of this choice, friends, the seeds planted by the intention to honor your own life while simultaneously wishing the best for the other person, is among the most wholesome karma you can create. It is the karma of self-respect. It is the karma of honesty. It is the karma of a heart that refuses to participate in its own destruction. Now, friends, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the idea that the people who come into our lives are teachers, and explore it from a slightly different angle. Because if this is true, if every person we love is, in some sense, a teacher sent by our own karma to show us something about ourselves, then the most important question we can ask after a relationship ends is not, why did they leave, but, what did they come to teach me? And did I learn the lesson? The Buddha encouraged this kind of reflection not as an exercise in self-blame but as an exercise in self-understanding. He taught that every experience, pleasant or painful, carries within it the seeds of wisdom, if we have the courage and the patience to look for them. The relationship that ended badly may have taught you something about your capacity for forgiveness. The partner who betrayed your trust may have taught you something about the importance of trusting yourself first. The love that slipped through your fingers may have taught you something about the difference between holding on and holding dear. There is a story from the Avadana, a collection of Buddhist narratives that is less well known than the Jataka tales but equally rich in psychological and spiritual insight. It tells of a merchant named Purna who traveled extensively for his business, leaving his wife Matri alone for months at a time. Matri was a devoted wife, patient and understanding, and she never complained about his absences. But over the years, the distance between them grew, not just the physical distance of his travels but the emotional distance of two people who had stopped truly seeing each other, who had become so accustomed to each other's presence and absence, that they had stopped really being present to each other at all. When Purna returned from a particularly long journey, he found that Matri had changed. She was quieter, more self-contained, less eager to please, more settled in her own being. At first, he was confused by this. Then he was threatened. He interpreted her independence as indifference, her self-containment as rejection, her quiet confidence as a sign that she no longer needed him. And because he could not bear the thought of not being needed, because his entire sense of worth was built on the belief that his wife's life revolved around him, he became suspicious, jealous, controlling. The irony, friends, was painful. Matri had not stopped loving him. She had simply grown. In his absence, she had found her own center, her own strength, her own relationship with herself. She had gone from being a wife who waited to being a woman who lived. And Purna, instead of celebrating this growth, instead of being proud of the remarkable person his wife had become, saw it as a threat, because in his mind, love meant dependence, and if she was no longer dependent on him, she must no longer love him. This story does not end in tragedy, friends. It ends in transformation, but the transformation is difficult, as real transformation always is. A wise elder in their community, someone who had studied with the Buddha's disciples, saw what was happening between Purna and Matri and invited them to talk, not together at first, but separately. She spoke to Purna about the difference between love and ownership, between genuine connection and the desperate need to be the center of another person's universe. She helped him see that his jealousy was not a sign of love but a sign of fear, that his controlling behavior was not protecting the relationship but destroying it, that the woman standing before him, this new, stronger, more self-assured Matri, was not a threat to his love but the fullest expression of everything he had always admired about her. And she spoke to Matri about the importance of not confusing independence with isolation, about the way that growth, if it is not shared, can become a wall rather than a bridge, about the responsibility of communicating your changes to the people you love rather than expecting them to simply adapt without explanation. She helped Matri see that her transformation, while beautiful and necessary, had happened in a vacuum, in the silence of Purna's absences, and that the gap between who she had been and who she had become was too large for Purna to cross without her help. This story, friends, speaks to one of the most common and most painful dynamics in long-term relationships, the dynamic of unequal growth. When one person changes and the other does not, when one person evolves and the other clings to the old version of the partnership, the relationship enters a critical phase. It can either adapt and grow, accommodating the changes and finding a new equilibrium, or it can calcify and crack, breaking apart under the pressure of a mismatch that neither person intended but both contributed to. The karmic lesson here is not about who is right and who is wrong. It is about the responsibility of awareness. If you are the one who is changing, you have a responsibility to communicate that change, to invite your partner into the process, to extend a hand across the gap that your growth has created. And if you are the one who feels left behind, you have a responsibility to examine your own resistance to change, to ask yourself whether your discomfort is really about the other person or about your own fear of the unknown, your own reluctance to leave the comfortable, familiar, well-worn groove of the relationship as it used to be. The Buddha taught that change is not optional. It is the fundamental nature of existence. Everything changes, all the time, without exception. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago. Your partner is not the same person they were 5 years ago. Your relationship is not the same relationship it was 5 years ago. And the only question, the only real question, is whether you will resist these changes and suffer, or accept them and grow. Accepting change within a relationship does not mean accepting everything without complaint. It does not mean tolerating behavior that is harmful or disrespectful or abusive. It means accepting the fundamental truth that the person you fell in love with will change, that you will change, that the relationship itself will change, and that these changes are not signs of failure but signs of life. A relationship that never changes is a relationship that has died. A relationship that is always changing, always evolving, always finding new ways to be in connection with each other, is a relationship that is alive, vibrant, and deeply rooted in the real, not in the fantasy of permanence. The Buddha spoke about this in a teaching that is sometimes overlooked but is profoundly relevant to the subject of love. In a discourse to the monks at Vesali, he compared the process of spiritual growth to the way the river Ganges flows toward the sea. The river does not flow in a straight line. It meanders. It curves. It sometimes seems to flow backward. It encounters obstacles, rocks and fallen trees and sandbanks, and it finds its way around them, not by force but by patience, by the gentle, persistent pressure of water that knows where it is going even when the path is not clear. Love, when it is healthy, flows the same way. It does not move in a straight line from infatuation to happily ever after. It meanders. It encounters obstacles. It sometimes seems to flow backward, returning to old arguments, old hurts, old patterns that you thought you had left behind. But if the underlying direction is good, if the basic intention is sound, if both people are committed to the same ultimate destination, which is mutual growth and mutual care, then the meandering is not a problem. It is the journey. And the journey, with all its twists and turns, is where the real love lives, not in the destination but in the willingness to keep flowing, to keep moving, to keep finding your way back to each other after every detour. And sometimes, friends, the river splits. Sometimes the water that has been flowing together for years, for decades, reaches a point where the landscape of life forces it to divide, one stream going east and the other going west. And when this happens, there is grief, of course there is grief, because the waters remember flowing together, remember the warmth and the companionship and the shared journey. But the grief does not have to be bitter. It can be clean, honest, simple, the natural response of a heart that has loved and must now let go. The Buddha would say that this letting go is not a defeat. It is a completion. The karma that brought you together has fulfilled its purpose. The lessons have been learned. The gifts have been exchanged. The seeds have been planted, and they will continue to grow, in both of you, in both streams, even though the streams have separated. Nothing is lost, friends. Nothing that was real ever disappears. It transforms. It becomes something new. It flows into the great ocean of experience where all waters eventually mingle, indistinguishable, inseparable, part of something far vaster than any individual river or any individual love. There is a passage in the Milindapanha, that remarkable dialogue between the monk Nagasena and King Milinda, where the king asks Nagasena to explain the nature of the self. Nagasena responds by pointing to the king's chariot and asking, "Is the chariot the wheels? Is it the axle? Is it the frame? Is it the seat? Is it the pole? Which part of the chariot is the chariot?" The king admits that the chariot is not any single part but the combination of all its parts working together. And Nagasena says, "Just so, your majesty, it is the same with a person. The self is not any single component but the temporary convergence of many components, arising and passing away from moment to moment." This teaching, while not directly about love, has profound implications for how we understand relationships. Because if there is no fixed, unchanging self, then there is no fixed, unchanging lover, no fixed, unchanging partner, no fixed, unchanging relationship. What we call our relationship is actually a dynamic, constantly shifting convergence of two ever-changing streams of experience, a chariot whose wheels and axle and frame are being replaced moment by moment, so gradually that we do not notice the changes until suddenly, one day, we look at the person sitting across from us and realize that neither of us is the same person who said, "I love you," on that first, trembling, miraculous night. This realization can be terrifying, friends. It can feel like the ground has been pulled out from under your feet. But it can also be liberating, if you let it. Because if both you and your partner are always changing, then the relationship is always new. Every morning is a new beginning. Every conversation is a first conversation with this particular version of this particular person at this particular moment in time. And every act of love is a fresh creation, not a repetition of the past but a spontaneous expression of the present, offered freely, without guarantee, without conditions, without the weight of all the yesterdays pressing down upon it. This is what the Zen tradition, which inherits so much from the Buddha's original teaching, calls beginner's mind. It is the mind that approaches each moment as though it were the first moment, the mind that is not burdened by preconceptions and expectations and the accumulated debris of the past. In the context of love, beginner's mind means looking at your partner, really looking at them, as though you were seeing them for the first time. It means listening to what they say without filtering it through the story of who you think they are. It means being curious, open, willing to be surprised, willing to discover something new about this person you thought you knew completely. And when a relationship ends, beginner's mind means approaching the aftermath with the same openness, the same willingness to learn, the same refusal to let the past define the future. It means allowing yourself to grieve without allowing the grief to harden into a permanent identity of victimhood. It means asking, what is here now? What is possible now? Who am I now, in this new configuration of my life, without this person, without this relationship, without the story I was telling about who we were together? And it means being willing to sit with the not knowing, with the uncomfortable, exhilarating, terrifying openness of a life that has not yet been written. The Buddha sat with this not knowing on the night of his awakening, friends. Before the dawn broke, before the morning star appeared, before the great realization flooded his consciousness with light, he sat in the darkness, not knowing. Not knowing if his years of practice had been worthwhile. Not knowing if the truth he was seeking even existed. Not knowing what the next moment would bring. And instead of running from the not knowing, instead of filling it with stories and theories and desperate hopes, he simply sat with it. He let it be what it was. He opened himself to it completely. And in that opening, in that total surrender to the present moment without any demand that it be other than what it was, the truth revealed itself. This same surrender, this same willingness to sit in the darkness without demanding that it become light, is what is asked of us when love dissolves and we find ourselves alone with questions that have no easy answers. Why did this person come into my life? Why did they leave? What was the purpose of all that joy, all that pain, all those nights of whispering in the dark about futures that would never come to pass? These questions rise up in us like waves, and the temptation is to answer them immediately, to construct a narrative that makes sense of the chaos, to find someone to blame or something to regret, because the mind cannot tolerate uncertainty. The mind needs a story the way lungs need air, and if a true story is not available, the mind will manufacture a false one and believe it with all its heart. But the Buddha would invite you to resist that temptation, friends. He would invite you to sit with the questions without rushing to answers. He would invite you to hold the uncertainty the way you would hold a fragile bird in your hands, gently, carefully, without squeezing, without trying to force it to fly before its wings are ready. Because the answers, when they come, will come in their own time, not on your schedule but on the schedule of your own unfolding wisdom. And the answers that arise from patience are always deeper, always more nourishing, always more true than the answers that are snatched from the air in a moment of panic. There is a story from the Samyutta Nikaya about a monk named Channa who was struggling with intense emotional turmoil. Channa had been a faithful practitioner for many years, but he had reached a point in his practice where everything seemed to fall apart. His meditation was turbulent. His mind was restless. The peace he had once found on the cushion had evaporated, replaced by a churning sea of doubt, confusion, and longing for something he could not name. He went to several senior monks for advice, and each one gave him a teaching, a technique, a framework for understanding what he was going through. But none of it helped. The teachings bounced off the surface of his suffering like rain off stone, leaving him just as confused and just as miserable as before. Finally, Channa went to the Venerable Ananda, the Buddha's closest attendant, and poured out his heart. He spoke of his confusion, his sense of failure, his feeling that the path he had been walking for years had suddenly become a dead end. Ananda listened with great patience and then said something that Channa did not expect. He said, "Channa, the problem is not that you lack understanding. The problem is that you are trying too hard to understand. You are grasping at wisdom the way a drowning man grasps at the surface of the water, and the grasping itself is pulling you under. Stop grasping. Stop trying to figure it out. Just be with what is. Let the confusion be confused. Let the pain be painful. Let the not knowing be not known. And see what happens." Channa took this advice to heart, and what happened was remarkable. When he stopped fighting his confusion, the confusion began to settle, like sediment in a glass of water that has been stirred and then left alone. When he stopped trying to force an understanding, understanding began to arise on its own, naturally, organically, the way a flower opens when the conditions of sunlight and water and soil are met. He did not achieve a sudden, dramatic enlightenment. He achieved something quieter, subtler, and in many ways more profound, a deepening of his relationship with his own experience, a willingness to be present with whatever was happening without needing to control it or categorize it or make it go away. This story, friends, is a perfect metaphor for the experience of heartbreak. When a relationship ends, your mind becomes like Channa's, turbulent, restless, grasping for answers, reaching for anything that will make the pain stop. And the more you grasp, the more elusive the answers become, because the answers are not things that can be grasped. They are things that must be allowed, that must be given space to emerge, that must be received rather than seized. So if you are sitting tonight with the ache of a love that has ended, with the heavy, persistent weight of missing someone who is no longer part of your daily life, with the maddening, relentless replaying of memories that feel like they belong to another lifetime, let me offer you this: stop trying to figure it out. Not forever. Not as a permanent strategy. But for now, for this moment, for this breath, put down the burden of understanding and simply be. Be with the pain. Be with the longing. Be with the emptiness that echoes through the rooms of your life like footsteps in a house where someone used to live but does not live anymore. Let it all be there, without fighting it, without analyzing it, without trying to transform it into something more manageable, more acceptable, more spiritually correct. Because the truth is, friends, that grief does not need to be managed. It needs to be honored. It does not need to be fixed. It needs to be felt. It does not need to be explained. It needs to be lived. And when you give yourself permission to live it, fully and without reservation, something begins to happen that no amount of analysis or explanation could achieve. The grief begins to do its work. It begins to loosen the knots of attachment that bind you to the past. It begins to dissolve the illusions that kept you clinging to something that was already gone. It begins to clear a space inside you, a raw, tender, vulnerable space, that is capable of receiving something new, something that could not enter while the old was still filling every corner of your heart. The Buddha understood this process intimately. In the Satipatthana Sutta, his most detailed teaching on the practice of mindfulness, he instructed his followers to observe their experience with a quality of attention that is both intimate and detached, both fully engaged and completely non-reactive. He said, when there is suffering, one knows there is suffering. When there is joy, one knows there is joy. When there is longing, one knows there is longing. He did not say, when there is suffering, one eliminates the suffering. He said, one knows. The knowing itself is the practice. The knowing itself is the healing. The knowing itself is the first step toward freedom. And in the context of love, this knowing takes a very specific and very powerful form. It is the knowing that says, I loved this person. The love was real. It arose because of conditions, and it changed because of conditions. It brought me joy, and it brought me pain, and both the joy and the pain were part of the same package, inseparable, intertwined, two sides of the same luminous, terrible, beautiful coin. And now it has ended, not because I failed, not because the universe is cruel, but because that is what conditioned things do. They arise. They change. They end. And in the space left by the ending, something new will arise, because that is also what conditioned things do. They create the conditions for what comes next. This, friends, is the deep teaching of dependent origination as it applies to the landscape of the heart. Nothing exists in isolation. Every ending contains within it the seeds of a new beginning. Every loss creates a space that can be filled with new growth. Every winter is followed by a spring, not because someone wills it to be so, but because that is the nature of cycles, the nature of conditioned existence, the nature of this extraordinary, heartbreaking, miraculous process we call life. There is a story from the Chinese Buddhist tradition, preserved in a collection of Chan teachings, that speaks to this with a simplicity and directness that takes your breath away. A young monk came to his teacher, distraught. He had received news that a woman he had loved deeply before his ordination, a woman he thought he had let go of, had married someone else. The news hit him like a physical blow, and he was ashamed of the intensity of his reaction. He was a monk. He was supposed to be beyond this kind of attachment. He was supposed to have transcended the petty concerns of romantic love. And yet here he was, crying in his teacher's room, feeling exactly like the lovesick young man he had been before he put on the robe. His teacher, an old monk with a face like weathered stone and eyes that held an ocean of kindness, did not scold him. He did not quote scriptures. He did not give a lecture on the dangers of attachment. He simply said, tell me about her." The young monk was taken aback. He had expected criticism, correction, a stern reminder of his vows. Instead, he was being invited to speak about the very thing he thought he should be suppressing. Hesitantly, then with growing fluency, he told his teacher about the woman, about her laugh, about the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, about the evening they spent by the river, watching the sunset, saying nothing, needing to say nothing, because the silence between them was so full of understanding that words would have been an intrusion. The old monk listened to every word. And when the young monk had finished, when the words had run out and the tears had dried and the room was quiet again, the teacher said, "That was beautiful. The love you shared was real and it was good. And it has ended. Both of these things are true. You do not have to choose between them. You do not have to pretend the love never happened in order to accept that it is over. You do not have to deny the beauty in order to bear the loss. Hold both. Love and loss. Joy and sorrow. The evening by the river and the morning you woke up alone. Hold both of them in your heart, and let them teach you what no scripture can teach, that the heart is vast enough to contain everything, the ecstasy and the agony, the fullness and the emptiness, without breaking. Friends, this is one of the most compassionate and most liberating teachings about love that I have ever encountered, and it comes not from a text but from the lived experience of a man who understood that the spiritual path does not require us to become less human but more human, not to feel less but to feel more, not to close our hearts but to open them so wide that even grief can find a place to rest without suffocating us. And this brings me to a teaching that the Buddha gave that is, perhaps, the single most important teaching for anyone who is navigating the waters of love and loss. It is a teaching about the nature of suffering itself, and it comes from the very first discourse the Buddha delivered after his awakening, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the discourse on setting the wheel of Dharma in motion. In this discourse, the Buddha identified the cause of suffering as tanha, a Pali word that is usually translated as craving but that really means something closer to thirst, a thirst that can never be fully quenched, a reaching for something that is always just beyond your grasp. The Buddha identified three forms of this thirst. The first is karma tanha, the thirst for sense pleasure, the desire for pleasant experiences, beautiful sights, sweet sounds, delicious tastes, the intoxicating cocktail of physical and emotional sensations that romantic love provides in such abundance. The second is bhava tanha, the thirst for becoming, the desire to be something, to have an identity, to exist in a particular way, which in the context of love manifests as the desire to be a partner, to be loved, to be in a relationship, to have the validation and security that comes from being chosen by another person. The third is vibhava tanha, the thirst for non-becoming, the desire to escape, to not exist, to not feel, which in the context of heartbreak manifests as the desire to numb the pain, to forget, to pretend that the relationship never happened, to erase the person from your memory and your heart. All three of these thirsts are at work in the experience of love, friends, and understanding them is the key to navigating love with wisdom rather than blindness. The thirst for pleasure drives us toward love. The thirst for becoming keeps us clinging to love. And the thirst for non-becoming drives us to extremes of denial and suppression when love ends. Together, they create a cycle of suffering that can seem inescapable, a wheel that turns and turns, carrying us from infatuation to attachment to loss to denial and back to infatuation again, round and round, life after life, relationship after relationship, without ever reaching a place of genuine peace. But the Buddha did not describe this cycle to depress us, friends. He described it to show us the way out. And the way out, he said, is not to stop loving. It is to stop thirsting. It is to love without the desperate need for love to be anything other than what it is in this moment. It is to enjoy the warmth of the fire without grasping at the flames. It is to appreciate the beauty of the sunset without demanding that it stay. It is to hold the hand of the person you love without squeezing so tight that you crush the very thing you are trying to protect. This is a subtle distinction, friends, and it is often misunderstood. People hear the Buddha's teaching on craving and they think he is saying, do not desire anything. Do not want anything. Do not love anything. But that is not what he is saying. He is saying, love freely. Want openly. Desire honestly. But do not attach your happiness to the fulfillment of those desires. Do not make your peace conditional on getting what you want. Do not confuse the natural, healthy, beautiful impulse of love with the neurotic, self-defeating, suffering-creating impulse of clinging. There is a world of difference between love and clinging, friends, and the Buddhist path is, in many ways, a lifelong education in learning to tell them apart. Love says, I am glad you are here. Clinging says, I cannot survive without you. Love says, I want you to be happy. Clinging says, I want you to make me happy. Love says, I will miss you when you go. Clinging says, I will not let you go. Love says, thank you for what we shared. Clinging says, you owe me more. Learning to love without clinging is perhaps the most difficult skill a human being can develop, and it is the work of a lifetime, not a weekend workshop. It requires patience with yourself, because you will cling despite your best intentions, and compassion for yourself, because the clinging is not a moral failure but a deeply conditioned habit that has been reinforced over countless lifetimes. It requires the willingness to fail, to catch yourself in the act of clinging, to feel the embarrassment and the frustration of repeating the same old pattern yet again, and to begin again, and again, and again, with the quiet, stubborn, infinitely patient determination of a river that keeps flowing toward the sea no matter how many rocks are in its path. The Buddha himself, in his previous lives as a bodhisattva, practiced this kind of love through countless incarnations, and the stories of those incarnations, preserved in the Jataka tales, are full of examples of love that is generous, selfless, willing to sacrifice, and yet free from the desperate clinging that turns love into a prison. In one life, the Bodhisattva was born as a prince named Vesantara, whose story is one of the most celebrated in all of Buddhist literature. Vesantara was renowned for his extraordinary generosity, a generosity so complete and so unconditional that he gave away everything he possessed, including, in the most extreme and controversial episode of the story, his own children. Now, this part of the story has troubled commentators for centuries, and rightly so. But the teaching it contains, beneath the dramatic and disturbing surface, is about the nature of selfless love, about the possibility of holding even the most precious relationships in open hands rather than clenched fists, about the radical trust that what is given away from a pure heart will not be lost but will return in a form that is even more beautiful than the original. And indeed, in the story, everything that Vesantara gives away is eventually returned to him, not because the universe rewards generosity with material goods, but because the karmic momentum of pure, unclinging love creates conditions of abundance and connection that cannot be destroyed by temporary loss. The children are returned. The family is reunited. The kingdom is restored. And the joy of the reunion is sweeter, deeper, more vivid than any joy that came before it, because it is a joy that has been tested by loss and found to be real, a joy that knows the darkness and chooses the light, a joy that has looked into the abyss of impermanence and said, with quiet courage, I will love anyway. This, friends, is the ultimate teaching of fate and karma in the context of love. The conditions that bring us together are mysterious, deep, and rooted in a past that stretches back further than memory can reach. The karma that shapes our relationships is complex, multi-layered, and not always easy to understand. But within this web of conditions and karma, we have a choice. We always have a choice. We can love with clinging and suffer, or we can love with openness and find peace. We can fight the impermanence of our connections and be broken by them, or we can embrace the impermanence and be transformed by it. We can demand that love conform to our expectations, or we can allow love to teach us what we need to learn, even when the lessons are painful, even when the teaching comes in the form of loss. The Buddha, in his infinite compassion, did not choose the path for us. He simply showed us the two paths and their respective destinations. One path leads to the repetition of suffering, the endless cycle of clinging and losing and clinging again, the wheel of samsara turning and turning without rest. The other path leads to freedom, to the kind of love that is not diminished by change, not destroyed by loss, not dependent on any particular person or any particular outcome, the love that the Pali Canon calls apamana, the immeasurable, the love that has no boundaries, no conditions, no expiration date, no fine print at the bottom of the contract. And the beautiful thing, friends, the truly, deeply, astonishingly beautiful thing, is that this immeasurable love does not require you to give up human love. It does not require you to stop falling in love, stop having relationships, stop feeling the exquisite, agonizing, incomparable thrill of looking into someone's eyes and seeing your own heart reflected back at you. It simply asks you to hold that experience lightly, to enjoy it fully, and to let it go gracefully when the time comes, knowing that what you are letting go of is not love itself but one particular expression of love, one particular wave in an ocean that is infinite. There is a teaching attributed to the great Indian Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna that captures this with mathematical precision. He said, "The person who understands emptiness understands everything. The person who understands everything understands compassion. The person who understands compassion loves without limit." This is the chain of realization that the Buddhist path offers, a chain that begins with the clear seeing of how things actually are, moves through the deep understanding that this clear seeing brings, and culminates in a love so vast, so all-encompassing, so free from the limitations of self and other, mine and yours, holding and releasing, that it embraces the entire universe in a single, boundless embrace. You do not have to reach that level of realization to benefit from this teaching, friends. You do not have to become a Nagarjuna or a Buddha or an enlightened sage sitting in a cave on a mountaintop. You simply have to be willing to look at your experience honestly, to feel what you feel without pretending you feel something else, to ask yourself the difficult questions, and to listen, really listen, to the answers that come, even when those answers are not the ones you were hoping for. Because the answers that come from honest inquiry are always, always, more healing than the stories we make up to protect ourselves from the truth. The story that says, "They left because they are a terrible person," protects your ego but poisons your heart. The story that says, "They left because I am unlovable," protects you from having to try again but imprisons you in a cage of self-pity. The story that says, "Love is a lie and I will never trust anyone again," protects you from future pain but condemns you to a future without joy. All of these stories are defense mechanisms, friends, walls erected by a frightened mind to keep the truth at bay. And the truth, while it is sometimes painful, is always, in the long run, less painful than the lies we tell ourselves to avoid it. The truth is that relationships are complex, multi-causal, conditioned phenomena that arise and pass away according to the interplay of countless factors, most of which are beyond our control. The truth is that the person who left you is not a villain, and you are not a victim, and the relationship that ended was not a failure but a completed chapter in a much longer story. The truth is that your pain is real and valid and worthy of compassion, and it will pass, not because it does not matter but because that is what pain does when it is met with awareness and acceptance rather than resistance and denial. The truth is that you are capable of love, deeply and authentically capable, and that this capacity has not been destroyed by your loss but only temporarily obscured by your grief, the way the sun is temporarily obscured by clouds but never actually stops shining. And the truth, friends, the deepest truth, the one that sits at the very bottom of all the other truths like bedrock beneath the shifting soil of experience, is that you are not alone. You have never been alone. Even in your darkest moments, even in the depths of your most devastating heartbreak, you are connected to every other being who has ever loved and lost, who has ever reached for someone and found empty air, who has ever whispered, "I love you," into the darkness and heard only silence in return. You are part of a vast, ancient, endlessly compassionate community of broken hearts, and this community, though invisible, is more real and more sustaining than any individual relationship could ever be. The Buddha saw this community. He saw it stretching back through uncountable lifetimes and forward into an unimaginable future. He saw every being who had ever suffered the pain of separation, every heart that had ever been broken by the loss of someone it loved, every soul that had ever wandered through the darkness of grief, wondering if the light would ever return. And he felt for each of them, for each of us, a compassion so deep and so all-encompassing that it became the very foundation of his teaching, the wellspring from which every word of Dharma flowed. There is a moment in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, the Buddha's discourse on loving kindness, that always strikes me with particular force. In this discourse, the Buddha describes the quality of love that a practitioner should cultivate, and he uses a comparison that is so simple, so universal, so deeply rooted in the most primal human experience, that it transcends all boundaries of culture and time and tradition. He says, "Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings." This love, this metta, is not romantic love. It is not the love of passion and desire and exclusive devotion. It is a love that is wider, deeper, more inclusive, a love that embraces not just the people we find attractive or compatible or convenient, but all beings, without exception, without reservation, without the slightest trace of partiality or favoritism. And yet, friends, this boundless love does not cancel out or replace the particular, specific, deeply personal love we feel for individual people. It contains it. It encompasses it. It provides a foundation so vast and so stable that the particular loves of our lives, the romantic partnerships, the friendships, the family bonds, can rest upon it without collapsing when they change or end. Because when your love is rooted in metta, when the particular love you feel for one person is embedded in a boundless love for all beings, the loss of that one person, as painful as it is, does not leave you loveless. It leaves you still held, still supported, still nourished by the ocean of love in which all particular loves are merely individual waves. This is not a theoretical idea, friends. It is a lived experience, available to anyone who is willing to practice it. The practice of metta meditation, in which you systematically cultivate feelings of goodwill and kindness toward yourself, toward those you love, toward those you feel neutral about, and eventually toward those you find difficult or have hurt you, is one of the most powerful and most practical tools the Buddhist tradition offers for healing the wounds of love. It does not magically erase your pain. It does not make you forget the person who left. It does not replace what was lost. But it does something equally important, perhaps more important. It reminds you that your capacity for love is not limited to one person, one relationship, one story. It is boundless. It is inexhaustible. It is as vast and as limitless as the sky, and no amount of loss can diminish it, any more than a storm can diminish the sky. The Buddha told a story once about a woman named Samavati, one of the chief queens of King Yudina of Kosambi. Samavati was renowned throughout the kingdom for her practice of metta, for the quality of loving kindness that she radiated so consistently and so powerfully that people felt calmer, happier, more at peace simply by being in her presence. Her story is complicated and involves palace intrigue, jealousy from a rival queen named Magandiya, and ultimately a great tragedy, but the aspect of her story that is most relevant to our conversation is the way she practiced love in the face of hatred. Magandiya despised Samavati. She despised her for her beauty, for her virtue, for the love that King Yudina showed her, for the respect she commanded among the palace servants and the townspeople. Magandiya's hatred was intense, personal, and relentless. She plotted against Samavati, spread lies about her, tried to turn the king against her, and eventually, according to the texts, orchestrated a fire that took Samavati's life along with the lives of her attendants. Throughout all of this, Samavati practiced metta toward Magandiya. Not because she was naive or foolish or unaware of the danger. She knew exactly what Magandiya was doing. She knew that her life was at risk. But she chose, consciously and deliberately, to respond to hatred with love, not because she expected it to change Magandiya's behavior, but because she understood that the quality of her own heart was the one thing she could control, the one thing that was truly hers, the one thing that no amount of external hostility could take from her. This is an extraordinary example of what it means to love without conditions, friends. Samavati did not love Magandiya because Magandiya was lovable. She loved Magandiya because Samavati was love. The love was not a response to the other person's behavior. It was an expression of Samavati's own nature, her own deepest commitment to the practice of metta, her own understanding that the heart which responds to hatred with hatred is a heart that has been conquered, while the heart which responds to hatred with love is a heart that is free. Now, I am not suggesting that if someone hurts you, you should simply love them and pretend it does not matter. That is not what the Buddha taught, and it is not what Samavati practiced. Samavati was aware of the danger. She took reasonable precautions. She did not seek out Magandiya's company or put herself unnecessarily in harm's way. But within her own heart, in the private, interior space where she was the sole authority. She chose love over hatred, compassion over resentment, freedom over bondage. And that choice, that inner orientation, was what made her one of the most revered figures in early Buddhist history. In the context of romantic love and heartbreak, this teaching has profound implications. When a relationship ends, especially when it ends badly, when there has been betrayal or deception or cruelty, the natural response is anger. The natural response is to demonize the other person, to paint them in the darkest possible colors, to tell yourself and everyone who will listen that they are a monster, a fraud, a heartless manipulator who never really loved you at all. And there may be elements of truth in that characterization. People do behave badly in relationships. People do lie, cheat, betray, and cause immense pain to the people who love them. But the Buddha would gently point out that holding on to anger toward the person who hurt you is like holding a burning coal in your hand with the intention of throwing it at them. You are the one who gets burned. The anger does not punish the other person. It punishes you. It occupies space in your heart that could be filled with peace. It consumes energy that could be devoted to healing. It keeps you tethered to the very person you are trying to escape, because as long as you are angry at them, they still have power over you, they still occupy a central place in your emotional life, they are still, in a very real sense, controlling your inner experience. Metta, on the other hand, cuts this cord. It does not require you to approve of what the other person did. It does not require you to forgive them in the conventional sense, to pretend that the harm did not happen or that it does not matter. It simply asks you to wish them well, from a distance, with no expectation of reciprocity, for the sake of your own freedom. It asks you to release the burning coal, not because they deserve your kindness, but because you deserve your peace. This is one of the most radical and most countercultural teachings in all of Buddhism, friends. In a world that glorifies revenge, that celebrates righteous anger, that tells you that your worth is measured by your willingness to fight back, the Buddha says, quietly, firmly, with the serene confidence of someone who has tested this truth against the hardest realities of human existence and found it to be unshakable, let go. Not for their sake. For yours. Let go, and be free. And this letting go, friends, this release of anger and resentment and the desperate need for justice or revenge, is itself a profound act of karmic transformation. Every moment you choose peace over anger, you are planting seeds of future peace. Every moment you choose compassion over resentment, you are creating conditions for future compassion. Every moment you choose to wish someone well, even someone who has hurt you deeply, you are breaking the chain of reactive karma that keeps the wheel of suffering turning, and you are creating, in its place, a new momentum, a new direction, a new set of conditions that will carry you toward experiences of greater harmony, greater connection, greater love. The Buddha spoke about this momentum in the Dhammapada, in a verse that is among the most famous in all of Buddhist literature. He said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love." This is the eternal law. This is not sentimental wishful thinking, friends. This is a precise description of how karma works. Hatred generates more hatred. Anger generates more anger. Resentment generates more resentment. The cycle feeds on itself, growing stronger and more entrenched with each repetition, until it becomes so deeply embedded in your psyche that you mistake it for your personality, for your identity, for the truth of who you are. But you are not your anger, friends. You are not your resentment. You are not your heartbreak. These are experiences you are having, not definitions of who you are. And they will pass, if you let them, the same way the clouds pass across the sky, leaving the sky itself unchanged, untouched, infinitely vast, infinitely blue. There is a teaching in the Visuddhimagga, the great compendium of Theravada Buddhist practice compiled by the monk Buddhaghosa in the 5th century, that offers a practical approach to cultivating metta toward a person who has caused you pain. Buddhaghosa suggests beginning not with the difficult person but with yourself, generating feelings of warmth and kindness toward your own being, your own heart, your own bruised and battered spirit. Then, gradually, expanding the circle of metta to include people you love, people you feel neutral about, and finally, slowly, carefully, the person who hurt you. Buddhaghosa acknowledges that this last step is extremely difficult, and he offers a variety of strategies for working through the resistance that naturally arises. One strategy is to reflect on the fact that the person who hurt you is, like all beings, subject to the law of karma, and that the harmful actions they performed will bring their own consequences in due time, without any need for you to add your anger to the equation. Another strategy is to contemplate the person's suffering, to recognize that a person who causes harm is almost always a person who is in great pain themselves, that cruelty is almost always the outward expression of an inner wound, that the person who broke your heart may have been acting from a place of brokenness that you cannot see but can perhaps imagine. This does not excuse their behavior, friends. Understanding why someone hurt you does not make the hurt less real. But it does change the quality of your response to the hurt. It moves you from a stance of pure opposition, this person is my enemy, to a stance of complex understanding, this person is a suffering being who caused me suffering. And from that stance of complex understanding, compassion can arise, not the weak, doormat kind of compassion that allows people to walk all over you, but the fierce, clear-eyed, unshakable kind of compassion that sees the full picture, holds the full truth, and chooses love anyway, not because it is naive but because it is wise. This kind of compassion, friends, is the ultimate fruit of understanding fate and karma in the context of love. When you truly see, when you truly understand, that your relationships are conditioned phenomena arising from an inconceivably complex web of causes and effects, you stop taking things so personally. You stop seeing yourself as the star of a drama in which other people are either supporting characters or antagonists. You begin to see yourself as one node in a vast, interconnected network of beings, all of them struggling, all of them suffering, all of them searching for the same thing you are searching for, which is love, connection, belonging, the feeling of being seen and accepted and valued for who you truly are. And this seeing, friends, this expanded, compassionate, deeply human seeing, changes everything. It changes how you love. It changes how you grieve. It changes how you heal. It changes how you move through the world after your heart has been broken, because you move not with the bitter, contracted energy of someone who has been wronged, but with the open, generous, luminous energy of someone who has been taught, who has been deepened, who has been cracked open by loss and found, in the cracking, a wider, more spacious way of being alive. The monk Sariputta, who was the Buddha's chief disciple in wisdom, once described the state of a mind that has been fully liberated from the bonds of attachment. He said it was like the sky, which accommodates everything, the sun, the moon, the stars, the clouds, the storms, the rain, the lightning, without being touched by any of it. The sky does not cling to the sun when it shines. The sky does not reject the clouds when they gather. The sky does not fight the storm or chase the rainbow. It simply holds everything, with infinite space, infinite patience, infinite equanimity. And the liberated heart, Sariputta said, is like this sky. It holds everything, the love and the loss, the joy and the grief, the coming together and the drifting apart, without being diminished by any of it. You might think, friends, that this kind of heart is impossibly distant, that it belongs only to fully realized beings who have spent lifetimes in meditation and have achieved a level of spiritual attainment that ordinary people can only dream of. But Sariputta would disagree. He would say that this heart is not something you achieve. It is something you uncover. It is already there, beneath the layers of conditioning and fear and habit and self-protection, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be liberated, waiting to shine with the light that has always been its nature. Every time you choose love over fear, you uncover a little more of this heart. Every time you choose forgiveness over resentment, you peel away another layer. Every time you choose to see the person who hurt you as a suffering being rather than an enemy, you widen the sky of your own consciousness by one more degree. And over time, these small, daily, unglamorous acts of love and forgiveness and understanding accumulate, the way individual drops of water accumulate to form a river, and the river carries you, not away from your pain but through it, to a place where the pain has been integrated, absorbed, transformed into something that no longer hurts but instead illuminates, no longer wounds but instead heals. This is the promise of the Buddhist path, friends, not that you will never be hurt, not that your heart will never break, not that the people you love will never leave, but that you have within you, right now, in this very moment, the capacity to meet whatever comes with a heart that is vast enough to hold it all. And the people who come into your life and then leave, the loves that bloom and then fade, the connections that form and then dissolve, these are not evidence of the cruelty of existence. They are evidence of its richness. They are proof that you are alive, that you are feeling, that your heart is open, that you are participating fully in the great, messy, glorious, heartbreaking, magnificent adventure of being human. And that adventure, friends, is not a solo journey, even when it feels like one, even when the person who was walking beside you has turned down a different road and you find yourself standing at a crossroads with nothing but the sound of your own breathing and the wide, open, terrifyingly empty horizon stretching out before you in every direction. Even then, you are not alone. You are surrounded by the invisible presence of every being who has ever stood at this same crossroads, every heart that has ever faced this same emptiness, every soul that has ever asked the same question you are asking now, which is, where do I go from here? The Buddha answered this question, not with a map, because there is no universal map for the territory of the heart, but with a compass. And the compass he offered has 4 points, 4 cardinal directions that can orient you no matter where you are, no matter how lost you feel, no matter how dark the night or how fierce the storm. These 4 points are the 4 Brahmaviharas, the 4 divine abodes, the 4 qualities of heart that the Buddha considered the highest expression of human potential, metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Metta is the love that wishes all beings well, the quiet, steady, unconditional warmth that does not discriminate between friend and stranger, between the person who stayed and the person who left, between the heart that loves you and the heart that turned away. Karuna is the compassion that feels the suffering of others and responds with the wish to alleviate it, the compassion that sees the person who hurt you not as an enemy but as a fellow sufferer, trapped in their own web of karma and conditioning, doing the best they can with the understanding they have. Mudita is the joy that delights in the happiness of others, even when that happiness does not include you, even when the person you love is happy with someone else, even when the future you had imagined for yourself is being lived by another person. And upekkha is the equanimity that holds all of these, the love, the compassion, the joy, in a steady, unshakable balance, not swinging wildly between euphoria and despair, not grasping at the pleasant or pushing away the painful, but resting in the calm, centered, deeply peaceful awareness that whatever comes, whatever goes, whatever changes, the heart remains whole. These four qualities, friends, are not abstract ideals reserved for saints and sages. They are practical, cultivable, available to anyone who is willing to practice them, and they are the most effective medicine I know for the suffering that arises from love and loss. When your heart is aching, metta soothes it. When your mind is consumed by the suffering of separation, karuna gives it a wider context. When jealousy threatens to poison your spirit because the person you love has found happiness elsewhere, mudita offers an antidote. And when the whole turbulent, overwhelming, seemingly unbearable experience of heartbreak threatens to sweep you off your feet and carry you away, upekkha provides the ground on which you can stand, firm and stable and centered, while the storm rages around you. The Buddha practiced these four qualities throughout his life, and the stories of his interactions with people who were suffering from the pain of love and loss are suffused with their warmth. He never dismissed anyone's pain. He never told anyone to simply get over it. He never suggested that the solution to heartbreak was to stop caring. Instead, he sat with people in their pain, held space for their grief, honored the reality of their experience, and then, gently, gradually, skillfully, helped them see that their pain, while real and valid, was not the whole story. There was more. There was always more. Behind the clouds, the sky. Behind the grief, the heart. Behind the loss, the love that no loss can destroy. There is one more story I want to share, friends, one more tale from the vast treasure house of Buddhist literature that speaks directly to the question of why we meet certain people and why we sometimes must let them go. It comes from a lesser-known section of the Jataka tales and concerns a pair of celestial musicians, Gandhabas, who lived in one of the heavenly realms. These two beings had been companions for eons, creating music together that was so beautiful, so harmonious, so perfectly attuned, that the other inhabitants of the heavenly realm would fall silent whenever they played, entranced by the purity and the depth of their shared creation. But even in the heavenly realms, friends, impermanence holds sway. Even the gods are subject to the law of conditions. And the time came when the karma that had sustained these two beings in the heavenly realm began to exhaust itself, and they knew, with the special foresight that celestial beings possess, that they would soon be reborn in the human world, separated by the vast, churning ocean of samsara, with no guarantee that they would ever find each other again. The grief they felt at this impending separation was immense, friends. It was the grief of two beings who had shared something so rare, so precious, so deeply beautiful, that the thought of losing it was almost unbearable. They went to the Bodhisattva, who in that lifetime was a wise deva in the same realm, and asked him, "Is there any way to ensure that we will find each other again? Is there any vow we can make, any merit we can dedicate, any practice we can undertake, that will guarantee our reunion in the human world?" The Bodhisattva listened with great compassion and then said something that surprised them. He said, you are asking the wrong question. The question is not how to guarantee that you will find each other again. The question is how to ensure that, whether you find each other or not, you will be at peace. Because if your peace depends on finding each other, then you are not at peace. You are in suspense. And suspense is just another form of suffering. He continued, the music you created together was beautiful because both of you brought your full selves to it. Each of you was a complete musician in your own right. The harmony arose not because you needed each other but because you chose each other, freely, joyfully, without dependence. If you carry this same completeness into your human lives, if you cultivate your own inner music until it rings true and clear on its own, then you will create the conditions for harmony wherever you go, with whatever beings you encounter, whether they are the same companion or a completely new one. The Bodhisattva then added, with a gentleness that held within it the wisdom of countless lifetimes, and if the karma between you is strong enough, if the conditions are right, you will find each other again. Not because you forced it, not because you clung to it, but because the music itself will bring you together. The music does not belong to either of you. It belongs to the space between you. And that space, once created, once filled with something genuine and beautiful, has a way of recreating itself, in this life or the next, in this form or another, because beauty, like truth, is not easily extinguished. This story, friends, carries within it everything we have been talking about tonight. The destiny, the conditions that bring people together. The karma that shapes the nature and duration of their connection. The impermanence that ensures that every meeting will eventually become a parting. The love that persists even when the beloved is gone. And the peace, the deep, unshakable, luminous peace, that comes from understanding all of this, from seeing it clearly, from accepting it fully, and from choosing to love anyway, to play the music anyway, to bring your full self to the experience of connection, knowing that the experience will change, will shift, will eventually dissolve into the great, silent, boundless ocean of being from which all experiences arise and to which all experiences return. You know, friends, there is a kind of courage that is rarely celebrated in our culture, a quiet, interior, deeply personal courage that has nothing to do with slaying dragons or winning battles or conquering enemies. It is the courage to love without guarantees. The courage to open your heart knowing that it will be broken. The courage to say, I love you, knowing that the response might be silence. The courage to build a life with someone knowing that the life you build is as impermanent as the morning dew, as fragile as a soap bubble, as temporary as the flame of a candle that could be blown out by the next gust of wind. This is the courage that the Buddhist path cultivates, friends. Not the courage to fight, but the courage to feel. Not the courage to conquer, but the courage to surrender. Not the courage to hold on, but the courage to let go. And this courage is not born of strength in the conventional sense. It is born of understanding. It is born of the clear, compassionate, unflinching seeing of things as they actually are, which is impermanent, conditioned, and ultimately, in their very transience, unbearably, heartbreakingly, magnificently beautiful. Every person you have ever loved has given you something that cannot be taken away. Every relationship you have ever been in has left a mark on your soul that time cannot erase. Every moment of connection, every shared laugh, every whispered confidence, every argument resolved and every argument left unresolved, every kiss and every tear and every long, comfortable silence, all of it lives in you, is part of you, has shaped you into the person you are right now, sitting here, breathing, alive, capable of love, capable of grief, capable of the extraordinary, alchemical act of transforming pain into wisdom. The people who have left your life have not disappeared, friends. They live in the way you see the world, in the songs that make you cry, in the streets you avoid because the memories are too vivid, in the phrases you use that you picked up from them without even realizing it, in the preferences and aversions and tender spots and resilient places that their love, and their leaving, sculpted into the landscape of your being. They are part of you, woven into the fabric of who you are, as inseparable from your identity as the color of your eyes or the shape of your hands. And the karma between you, the intricate, ancient, endlessly complex web of cause and effect that brought you together and then pulled you apart, has not been wasted. Not a single moment of it. Every joy was a seed planted. Every sorrow was a lesson offered. Every moment of presence was a gift given. And every moment of absence is a space created, a space in which new growth can occur, new connections can form, new music can be made, music that is different from the old music but no less beautiful, no less true, no less worthy of being played with all the passion and tenderness and skill you possess. So if you are grieving tonight, friends, grieve. Let the tears come. Let the memories wash over you like waves. Let the longing sit in your chest like a stone. Do not fight it. Do not suppress it. Do not rush through it to get to the other side. There is no other side. There is only this moment, this breath, this ache, this love that persists even in the absence of its object, this stubborn, indestructible, magnificently human capacity to feel deeply in a world that is constantly changing. And when the grief has done its work, when the tears have dried and the ache has softened and the memories have settled into a quiet, warm, gently luminous place in your heart, look around you. See what is here. See who is here. See the new faces, the new possibilities, the new doors that have opened now that the old ones have closed. See the life that is waiting for you, not the life you planned, not the life you expected, not the life that includes the person who is gone, but a life that is yours, fully and completely yours, to fill with whatever love and meaning and beauty you choose. The Buddha did not promise us a life without heartbreak, friends. He promised us something far more valuable. He promised us the capacity to meet heartbreak with wisdom, to hold it with compassion, to learn from it with humility, and to emerge from it with a heart that is not smaller and harder but larger and softer, a heart that has been broken open rather than broken down, a heart that has room for everything, the joy and the sorrow, the love and the loss, the meeting and the parting, the music and the silence. And in that room, in that vast, spacious, infinitely accommodating room of the awakened heart, there is a peace that no loss can disturb, a love that no absence can diminish, and a quiet, steady, unshakable knowing that says, without words, without effort, without the slightest trace of doubt, all is well. All has always been well. And all will always be well. Because the love that brought us together was never really ours to begin with. It was a gift from the universe, a temporary, precious, indescribably beautiful loan, and we are returning it now, with gratitude, with grace, and with the deep, calm confidence that the universe, in its infinite generosity, will send more. It always does. It always has. And it always will. The rain falls, friends, and the earth receives it. The river flows, and the ocean welcomes it. The flower blooms, and the world is made more beautiful by it. And the heart loves, and the love, even when it seems to vanish, even when the person it was given to has gone, even when the story has reached its final page and the book has been gently, tenderly, reverently closed, the love does not end. It seeps into the soil of your being. It nourishes roots you cannot see. And one day, when the conditions are right, when the seasons have turned, when the rain has fallen enough and the sun has shone enough and the earth has rested enough, something new will push its way up through the dark, rich, fertile ground of your experience, something green and tender and alive, something you did not plant, did not expect, and you will look at it with wonder, and you will know, with a certainty that needs no proof, that this new growth is the fruit of everything you have loved and lost, the harvest of every tear you have shed, the flowering of every heartbreak you have endured, transformed by the mysterious, beautiful, endlessly compassionate alchemy of time and awareness and the indestructible human capacity for love, into something that is not the same as what you had before, but is no less precious, no less real, no less worthy of being cherished with every fiber of your being, for as long as it lasts, which is exactly as long as it is meant to last, and not one moment more.